Welcome to Nocturne Historia. History remembers its conquerors, those rare figures whose will bends the arc of empires. Few have cast as long a shadow as the man who, for 16 years, held Rome itself in a grip of terror. His name, Hannibal Barca, echoes still across the millennia, a name that once made the mightiest republic in the ancient world tremble. Between 264 and 146 BC, two Mediterranean powers clashed in a series of wars that would determine the fate of the Western world. The Punic Wars saw rising Rome pitted against the established power of Carthage, not merely for territory or wealth, but for survival itself. The battlefield stretched across Sicily, Spain, North Africa, and the Italian peninsula. Their armies clashed on land and sea, leaving hundreds of thousands dead in their wake. From this crucible of fire emerged legendary figures: Regulus, who chose torture and death over dishonor; Scipio, whose brilliance earned him the epithet Africanus; and towering above them all, the Carthaginian general, whose military genius nearly brought Rome to ruin. Hannibal's audacity in crossing the Alps with war elephants remains one of history's most astonishing feats, while his tactical mastery at Cannae still features in military academies worldwide. His name became so feared that Roman mothers would quiet their unruly children with whispered warnings: "Hannibal is at the gates." This is the story of that man, of his sacred oath sworn in boyhood, of his relentless pursuit of vengeance against a rising empire, of brilliant victories and ultimate defeat, of a clash between civilizations that would shape the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. This is the story of Hannibal Barca in the Punic Wars, a tale of ambition and honor, of triumph and catastrophe, of a moment when the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance, dependent upon the decisions of one extraordinary mind. The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Carthage as a young boy observed his father prepare for conflict. This was the son of Hamilcar Barca, heir to both a legacy and a sacred oath. It was the year 237 BC, and the wounds of defeat still festered in the proud maritime city-state. The First Punic War had concluded 9 years earlier, leaving the once mighty North African power humiliated, stripped of Sicily, and burdened with crushing indemnities. The Roman Republic had emerged as more than a rival. It had become an existential threat in the temple of Baal Hammon, where sacred fires burned eternal. It was here that the Carthaginian general placed his 9-year-old son's small hand upon the altar, the vow he swore that would resonate through history to never befriend Rome. This was no juvenile promise made in ignorance. The temple's shadows seemed to deepen around the boy, as if the gods themselves leaned closer to witness this covenant. This pledge would bind the youth more surely than chains of iron, setting in motion events that would nearly bring the rising Italian power to its knees. Carthage, once the undisputed mistress of the Western Mediterranean, had grown from a trading hub founded by Phoenician settlers into a powerful maritime empire. Its wealth, built on trade rather than conquest, flowed from purple dyes, silver, tin, ivory, and gold through its harbors. Its fleet was unrivaled and its merchants legendary. Yet as Rome's rise continued, Carthage found itself facing an enemy like no other. The initial confrontation between these two powers had been fought at sea, a bitter irony, for the Romans, focused on infantry, had defeated Carthage in its own domain. The loss of Sicily, the first and most prized of its provinces, was just the beginning. The mercenary revolt that followed nearly destroyed Carthage from within, and only the genius of Hamilcar Barca had preserved his homeland from collapse. Under the guidance of his father, Hannibal Barca's education extended beyond the traditional training of a Carthaginian noble. His father, Hamilcar, sought to rebuild Carthage's strength through a new strategy: the conquest of Iberia. The silver mines of Spain would replenish the depleted treasury, and its warriors would bolster Carthage's military might. While Rome focused its attention eastward on the Hellenistic kingdoms, the Phoenician descendants in Iberia would forge a new empire in the west. The young heir, Hannibal, absorbed these lessons with uncanny aptitude. During the day, he trained alongside the Numidian cavalry, learning to ride without saddle or bridle, mastering the art of throwing javelins with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed. In the evenings, Hannibal studied Greek literature and philosophy under learned tutors, honing an intellectual prowess that would one day rival and outmaneuver Rome's greatest commanders. Tragedy struck during the summer of 229 BC, when Hamilcar drowned while covering his army's retreat across the Duca River. Leadership passed to his son-in-law Hasdrubal. The young Hannibal, now faced with the reality of war, continued his education in the crucible of the Iberian campaign, observing Hasdrubal's methods of expanding influence through diplomacy and military strength. Hasdrubal established Nova Carthage, or New Carthage, as the seat of Punic power on the Iberian Peninsula, causing concern in Rome. 3 years after Hamilcar's death, Hasdrubal negotiated the Ebro Treaty with Rome, establishing the Ebro River as the northernmost boundary of Carthaginian influence in Iberia. An uneasy peace prevailed, built upon mutual suspicion. However, assassins claimed Hasdrubal's life at the close of his 5th year in command. With his death, the expeditionary force proclaimed the 25-year-old Hannibal as their commander. These battle-hardened veterans saw in him the image of his father, the same piercing gaze, the same natural authority. What remained invisible, however, was the childhood oath Hannibal had sworn, still burning within him, a promise that had shaped every aspect of his development. In Carthage, the Council of Elders debated whether to entrust such significant power to one so young. But Hannibal, already consolidating control over southern Iberia through lightning-fast campaigns against restive tribes, silenced his critics. Here emerged a new type of Punic leader, one who combined the mercantile cunning of his culture with military genius that seemed divinely inspired. Meanwhile, across the sea, the Roman Republic was preoccupied with affairs in Illyria and Macedonia, paying scant attention to the reports from Iberia. Yet this new adversary would soon demand their attention. Hannibal, standing in the newly established city of Nova Carthage, gazed northward, Isola, beyond the boundary of the Ebro Treaty, his childhood vow echoing in his memory. His father's spirit urged him onward. Rome believed any future conflict would occur on familiar ground, either at sea or in Sicily. They never imagined the war would come from an entirely unexpected direction. Hannibal had studied their methods, understood their weaknesses, and sworn their destruction. In the summer of 219 BC, a decisive moment arrived. The city of Saguntum, an ally of Rome and positioned south of the Ebro River, represented both an opportunity and a provocation to Punic interests. When reports surfaced of its residents harassing Punic allies, Hannibal seized upon the pretext. Roman emissaries arrived with stern warnings, only to find that Hannibal's forces had already departed, leaving diplomacy to wither in the Mediterranean heat. The die was cast. For 8 long months, the siege of Saguntum would unfold. The African army's siege engines battered the city's walls, and famine and desperation took root. Defenders fought with the ferocity of the condemned, knowing that Roman aid would soon arrive, but their faith in Rome proved misplaced. The Senate, paralyzed by internal debates and distant concerns, sent only words, while their allies suffered. As autumn leaves fell and winter descended, the siege of Saguntum continued unabated. Hannibal, driven by the legacy of his father, pushed his engineers and troops beyond conventional limits, adapting tactics as the situation demanded. When the direct assault faltered, he ordered tunnels to be excavated beneath the city's defenses. For every tunnel, the defenders collapsed. 3 more appeared elsewhere. The final assault came in early spring when the remaining 17 elders prepared terms of surrender. However, the citizens of Saguntum chose a different path. They constructed a massive pyre in the city center and consigned themselves, their possessions, and their city to the purifying flames. Rather than submit to foreign rule, they embraced death, standing in defiance of their conquerors. Hannibal watched the smoke spiral into the sky, his heart set on the war to come. The immolation of Saguntum served its purpose. News of the city's fall reached Rome, and public outrage erupted across the Republic. The Senate swiftly dispatched envoys to Carthage, demanding the surrender of its generals. The ruling council in Carthage faced an impossible choice: abandon their most capable military leader or face Roman vengeance. An aged counselor, Hanno, warned of disaster, reminding his peers of Rome's naval superiority and the vulnerability of Carthage's coastal settlements. These cautious voices were drowned out by the war fervor of the more impassioned members of the council, including the faction eager for revenge. After heated debates, the envoys received their answer. The treaty had specified the Ebro as the boundary of Carthaginian influence, but since Saguntum lay south of it, no surrender would be forthcoming. The Roman delegation's response became legendary. Gathering his toga into a fold, the chief envoy addressed the council, stating, "Here I carry both peace and war. Choose which you will receive." When the council president responded, "Give us whichever you prefer," the envoy let his garments fall open. "Then I give you war." The councilors, united in their resolve, replied with a single voice, "We accept it and shall prosecute it with the same spirit." Thus began the conflict that would determine Mediterranean supremacy for centuries to come. While Rome prepared for conventional warfare, assembling legions to invade Africa and Iberia, Hannibal had other plans. As spring blossomed across the Iberian Peninsula in 218 BC, an extraordinary military enterprise took shape. While Roman strategists anticipated naval engagements and African landings, Hannibal prepared a maneuver of unprecedented audacity. He would strike not at Rome's distant territories, but at Italy itself, bringing devastation to the very heartland of the Republic. The force assembled at New Carthage presented a formidable spectacle. 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. Towering beasts of destruction whose very presence sent terror through enemy ranks. Yet more remarkable than these numbers was the diversity of the host. Libyan heavy infantry marched alongside Numidian horsemen. Balearic slingers practiced their lethal art, while Iberian tribesmen sharpened their distinctive swords. This was not just a military campaign. It was a coalition of peoples united by a single man's vision. The march northward began with astonishing speed. The multinational force reached and crossed the Ebro before Roman vessels could establish an effective blockade. The Pyrenees loomed ahead, their peaks still crowned with the lingering snow of winter. Here, the first test of resolve emerged, as local tribes contested every mountain pass. Through a blend of diplomatic persuasion and ruthless combat efficiency, Hannibal's forces overcame these obstacles. But the unforgiving terrain and constant skirmishes took a toll. By the time they descended into Gaul, nearly 20,000 men had been lost to desertion or battle. In Gaul, Hannibal wielded gold and eloquence with equal effectiveness. Some tribal leaders saw opportunity in siding with this extraordinary figure from the south, while others recognized the existential threat his passage represented. Through careful negotiation and occasional displays of overwhelming might, Hannibal secured safe passage through the lowlands, en route to the most daunting challenge yet. By early autumn, the vanguard reached the foothills of the Alps. Here stood mountains unlike anything Hannibal's African or Iberian troops had encountered before. Vast, implacable barriers scraping the sky. The true test of the Punic commander's resolve was just beginning. As the autumn leaves fell and winter descended, the siege of Saguntum continued unabated. Hannibal, determined to honor his father's legacy, pushed his engineers and soldiers beyond the usual limits, adapting tactics as the situation demanded. When a direct assault faltered, he ordered tunnels to be dug beneath the city's defenses. For every tunnel the defenders destroyed, 3 more emerged in new locations. The final assault came in early spring as the 17 remaining elders of Saguntum prepared to surrender. However, the citizens chose a different path. They built a massive pyre in the city center and consigned themselves, their possessions, and their city to the flames, choosing death over submission to foreign rule. Hannibal stood amidst the ruins, watching the smoke rise toward the indifferent heavens. The immolation of Saguntum served its purpose. News of the city's fall reached Rome, igniting public outrage. The Senate quickly dispatched envoys to Carthage, demanding the surrender of the generals. Carthage's ruling council now faced an impossible choice: abandon their greatest military leader or face the wrath of Rome. An old counselor, Hanno, warned of the inevitable disaster, reminding the council of Rome's naval superiority and the vulnerability of their coastal settlements. These cautious voices were drowned out by the fervor of those eager for war. After heated debate, the envoys received their answer. The treaty had set the Ebro River as the boundary of Carthaginian influence, and since Saguntum lay south of it, Carthage refused to surrender. The Roman envoy, gathering his toga into a fold, addressed the council. "Here I carry both peace and war. Choose which you will receive." When the council president replied, "Give us whichever you prefer," the envoy let his garments fall open and declared, "Then I give you war." The council, united in resolve, responded, "We accept it and shall prosecute it with the same spirit." Thus, the conflict that would determine Mediterranean supremacy for centuries began. While Rome prepared for conventional warfare, assembling legions to invade Africa and Iberia, Hannibal was already formulating a plan of audacity. As spring bloomed across the Iberian Peninsula in 218 BC, an extraordinary military operation was set into motion. While Roman strategists anticipated naval engagements and land invasions of Africa, Hannibal prepared to strike directly at Italy, bringing the war to the very heart of the Roman Republic. At New Carthage, Hannibal assembled a formidable force, 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, towering beasts that struck fear into the hearts of Rome's soldiers. More remarkable than these numbers was the diversity of the force. Libyan heavy infantry marched alongside Numidian horsemen, while Balearic slingers honed their deadly accuracy, and Iberian tribesmen sharpened their distinctive swords. This was no ordinary military campaign, but a coalition of peoples united by Hannibal's vision. The march northward began with astonishing speed. The multinational force crossed the Ebro River before Roman ships could establish a blockade. Ahead lay the Pyrenees, their peaks still crowned with snow from winter. Here, the first test of resolve emerged as local tribes contested every mountain pass. Through a combination of diplomacy and ruthless combat efficiency, Hannibal's forces overcame these obstacles. But the unforgiving terrain and constant skirmishes took a heavy toll. By the time they descended into Gaul, nearly 20,000 soldiers had been lost to desertion or battle. In Gaul, Hannibal used gold and persuasion with equal skill. Some tribal leaders saw opportunity in allying with this extraordinary leader from the south, while others recognized the existential threat he posed. Through careful negotiation and displays of overwhelming strength, Hannibal secured safe passage through the lowlands, bringing his forces closer to the Alps. The next great challenge. By early autumn, Hannibal's vanguard reached the foothills of the Alps. Here stood mountains unlike anything his troops had faced before, vast, implacable barriers scraping the sky. What followed remains one of the most remarkable achievements in military history. Hannibal reportedly reassured his faltering troops, telling them, "We are not scaling the walls of heaven. These mountains are surmountable by men, indeed by women and children of the native tribes who call them home." The ascent began along treacherous trails, barely wide enough for a single column, let alone elephants and supply wagons. Mountain tribes hurled boulders from unreachable heights. Ravines claimed both men and beasts. Frigid winds tore at exposed skin, and snow and ice made every step perilous. The most daunting moment came when a rock slide obliterated the path ahead, leaving only a sheer cliff face for 3 days. Progress halted as the engineers worked to create a new route. They built massive fires against the rock face and doused it with vinegar, causing it to fracture. Teams widened the fissures until a new path emerged from the living stone. After 15 days of alpine torment, the forward elements crested the final pass. The sight that greeted the exhausted soldiers was immortalized by Livy. The verdant plains of northern Italy spread below, a promised land. Their leader ascended a promontory alone, gazing upon the country of his sworn enemy. Behind them lay thousands of dead, lost to the mountains and ambushes. Ahead waited the Roman legions, still unaware of the storm coming their way. By the time the final count was taken on the plains below, the cost of the daring passage became clear. Of the 90,000 infantry who had left New Carthage, only 20,000 remained fit for combat. The cavalry had dwindled from 12,000 to 6,000, and most of the elephants had perished. Yet, despite these losses, the Alpine crossing had achieved its strategic objective. The invading force now stood on Italian soil, having executed a maneuver that Rome had deemed impossible. More importantly, they arrived at the perfect moment to exploit the growing tensions between the Republic and the Gallic tribes of the Po Valley. These disaffected peoples flocked to Hannibal's banner, swelling his ranks with warriors eager for revenge against Rome. The passage of the Alps would be celebrated for centuries as a testament to human will, but for Hannibal, it was only the opening move in a grand strategy to bring the Roman colossus to its knees. Following their victory at Lake Trasimene, Hannibal's forces wintered in northern Italy, building alliances with Gallic tribes eager to free themselves from Roman domination. Spring brought a hazardous march through the flooded marshlands of the Arno, where Hannibal's troops waded through brackish waters for 4 days and nights, unable to find dry ground for rest. During this grueling journey, Hannibal himself, mounted on the sole surviving war elephant, developed an eye infection that would eventually cost him the sight in his right eye, a permanent mark of his commitment to the campaign. The following year, Hannibal's genius in military deception would reach new heights at Lake Trasimene. The new Roman consul, Gaius Flaminius, eager to engage the invaders, pursued their apparent retreat along the lakeshore. Blinded by the morning mist and focused solely on the visible elements of the enemy column, the Romans marched directly into a perfectly crafted ambush. Hannibal had positioned his forces on the surrounding heights overnight, setting up a killing ground. When signal fires blazed on the hillsides, the trap was sprung. Thousands of Punic warriors descended from concealed positions, striking the unprepared Roman column from all sides. Unable to form proper battle lines in the narrow passage between the lake and the hills, the Roman legionaries fought as individuals rather than as a disciplined unit, which played directly into Hannibal's hands. The result was a slaughter. 15,000 Romans were killed, including Flaminius himself. Another 15,000 surrendered, while only 6,000 managed to escape, carrying the news of the disaster back to Rome. These successive defeats at Trasimene triggered unprecedented measures in the capital. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, granting him extraordinary powers to address the crisis. Recognizing the futility of direct confrontation, Fabius adopted a strategy of attrition, following the invading army at a safe distance, harassing supply lines, avoiding pitched battles, and gradually wearing down Hannibal's numerically inferior force. This approach earned Fabius the derisive nickname Cunctator, the delayer, from impatient Romans who longed for decisive action. For months, this shadow dance continued across central Italy. Though tactically sound, the Fabian strategy proved politically unsustainable as elections approached. The Roman citizenry demanded a confrontation and victory, not careful maneuvering. Popular sentiment favored aggressive action, leading to the appointment of Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus as consuls for the coming year. Under pressure to deliver a decisive victory, these new commanders assembled the largest Roman army ever fielded. 8 legions, with supporting allies, totaling nearly 80,000 infantry and several thousand cavalry. The Romans tracked Hannibal's force to Cannae, a village in southeastern Italy, where the invaders had established a supply depot. Here, on an August day that would forever live in military infamy, the opposing forces met on a dusty plain near the Aufidus River. What transpired at Cannae defied conventional understanding of ancient warfare. Outnumbered nearly 2-1, Hannibal arranged his forces in an unconventional formation. He placed his weakest troops, Gallic and Spanish infantry, at the center in a convex arc, while positioning his veteran Libyan heavy infantry on the flanks. His superior cavalry formed the wings, tasked with driving off the Roman horse and then enveloping the enemy rear. As the battle commenced, the Roman center advanced confidently against the seemingly vulnerable middle of Hannibal's line. The arc bent backward under pressure but did not break, slowly forming a concave formation that continued to yield ground while maintaining cohesion. Meanwhile, the Punic cavalry routed their Roman counterparts and swung around to the rear of the advancing legions. The trap closed with mathematical precision as Roman forces pressed deeper into the collapsing center. The veteran Libyan infantry on the flanks wheeled inwards simultaneously, while the returning cavalry sealed the encirclement from behind. The vast Roman army found itself surrounded, compressed into a tightening pocket, where their superior numbers became a critical disadvantage. The legionaries were so densely packed that many could not raise their arms to defend themselves. The result was a massacre. Nearly 70,000 Romans were slaughtered, and the once feared legions of Rome were reduced to rubble. The Battle of Cannae would be remembered as one of the greatest tactical victories in military history, and a turning point in the Second Punic War, as Hannibal's genius turned the tide of battle in a way no one thought possible. The aftermath of the Battle of Cannae left the Roman Republic reeling from one of the most crushing defeats in its history. Between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans and their allies lay dead or dying on the field. Among the dead were Consul Paulus and 80 senators who had taken the field. Consul Varro managed to escape with a small cavalry contingent, bearing the news of this unprecedented disaster in Roman history. This wasn't just a tactical victory for Hannibal, but the perfect execution of battlefield geometry. Military academies worldwide still study this engagement as the quintessential battle of annihilation. However, the psychological impact of Cannae was as profound as the physical losses. Cities throughout Italy, witnessing Rome's vulnerability, began to abandon their loyalty to the Republic. The great ports of Syracuse in Sicily and Tarentum in southern Italy opened their gates to Hannibal's forces. Even King Philip V of Macedonia negotiated an alliance with Carthage, marking a significant shift in the balance of power. Citizens in Rome braced for the inevitable assault on their city walls, as survivors reported that the path to Rome lay open, with inadequate forces remaining to defend the Seven Hills. A famous exchange between Hannibal and his cavalry commander, Maharbal, is recorded by ancient historians. When Hannibal declined to immediately march on Rome, preferring to consolidate his position in southern Italy, Maharbal remarked, "You know how to win victories, but not how to use them." Whether this strategic decision represented wisdom or a missed opportunity has been debated for centuries. What remained indisputable was the profound psychological wound inflicted on Rome, a wound that would never fully heal. For 15 years, Hannibal kept his army on Italian soil, an astonishing feat of logistics and leadership without secure supply lines to his homeland. Hannibal sustained his operations through careful management of resources, alliances with Italian communities, and remarkable tactical flexibility. His presence alone forced Rome to maintain multiple armies in the field, draining the Republic's manpower and treasury. Yet even as Hannibal established dominance in southern Italy, Rome's resilience began to surface in unexpected ways. The Republic's refusal to consider peace after such catastrophic defeats revealed a strength that would eventually prove decisive. Unlike other Mediterranean powers that typically sought terms after such a loss, Rome declared that no discussions would be entertained while foreign troops remained on Italian soil. This intransigence transformed the conflict into a test of endurance, playing to Rome's demographic advantages. Under the guidance of Fabius Maximus, whose cautious strategy gained renewed appreciation after Cannae, Roman forces avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal's main army. Instead, they focused on recapturing defecting cities, one by one, punishing those who had abandoned the Roman cause. The message was clear: the invader might win battles, but Rome would inevitably reclaim its territories. Communities contemplating defection had to weigh temporary relief against eventual retribution. Two emerging Roman commanders demonstrated the adaptability that would ultimately overcome the Punic threat. Marcus Claudius Marcellus, known as the Sword of Rome, balanced Fabius' cautious approach with aggressive action when the situation allowed. In the 12th year of the war, he recaptured Syracuse after a prolonged siege. Despite the city's defenses designed by the brilliant mathematician Archimedes, the scientist perished during the capture, reportedly killed by a Roman soldier while absorbed in his geometric calculations. Meanwhile, a new threat emerged in Iberia, where Carthage's position had weakened following the departure of its main forces. The young Publius Cornelius Scipio, having lost both his father and uncle fighting in the peninsula, was given command of Roman forces in Iberia. Though young and with limited experience, Scipio's appointment reflected both his family's sacrifice and his natural talents. 3 years later, Scipio's capture of New Carthage demonstrated tactical brilliance worthy of his adversary. Learning that the city's northern defenses were weak due to a lagoon considered impassable, Scipio discovered that the water level dropped significantly during certain winds. Seizing the opportunity, he sent a selected force through the temporarily shallow waters, setting the stage for a victory that would turn the tide in Iberia. After Scipio's remarkable victory in Iberia, he took the bold step of bringing the war directly to Africa, forcing Carthage to recall its greatest general, Hannibal, to defend its homeland. The decision to recall Hannibal after his 16-year occupation of Italy marked both a tactical necessity and personal heartbreak. The veteran soldiers who had followed him across the Alps, triumphed at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, now withdrew to protect their distant shores. As his army embarked from Croton, Hannibal reportedly gazed back at the land where he had demonstrated his genius, knowing that he might never return. The climactic confrontation took place in 202 BC near the village of Zama. For the first time, the two greatest commanders of their age, Hannibal, the Punic master of mobile warfare, and Scipio, the Roman innovator, faced each other directly. Hannibal's forces, composed of veterans from his Italian campaigns, fresh recruits, and 80 war elephants, confronted Scipio's legions in an intense battle that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics closely, arranged his legions in an unconventional formation. He created lanes through which the charging elephants could pass harmlessly. As the battle progressed, Scipio demonstrated his mastery of Hannibal's own methods. While the infantry engagement remained uncertain, Scipio's superior Roman and Numidian cavalry drove their counterparts from the field and then returned to strike Hannibal's rear in the same manner that Hannibal had used at Cannae. The roles were now reversed, and Hannibal, despite fighting brilliantly, found himself outmaneuvered by a younger general who had learned from his tactics. This defeat at Zama ended the Second Punic War. Carthage, unable to sustain its military power, was forced to accept harsh terms: the surrender of its navy and war elephants, the abandonment of all territories outside Africa, the payment of a crippling indemnity over 50 years, and a prohibition on waging war without Roman permission. Carthage, once a great maritime power, became a Roman client state. Although some urged Hannibal to continue resistance, he recognized that further conflict would only bring destruction to Carthage. Choosing peace, he implemented political and economic reforms to help rebuild his homeland. However, despite Roman restrictions, Hannibal's political career was far from over. Eventually, Roman demands for his surrender forced him into exile at the court of Antiochus III of Syria, where he provided strategic advice during Antiochus's ultimately unsuccessful war against Rome. Pursued relentlessly by Roman agents across the Mediterranean, the aging general found precarious refuge in various courts. When his final protector, King Perseus of Bithynia, prepared to surrender him to Rome, Hannibal chose to take poison rather than face capture. According to Plutarch, his final words acknowledged the implacable enemy that had defined his existence. "Let us relieve the Romans from their fear, since they think it long to wait for the death of an old man." 50 years after Hannibal's death, the Third Punic War erupted, not due to the great general who had once brought Rome to the brink of collapse, but as a result of Rome's determination to eliminate a recovering commercial rival. After a 3-year siege, Roman forces under Scipio Africanus the Younger, grandson of the general who had defeated Hannibal, completely destroyed Carthage. The city was razed, its population enslaved, and its soil salted, ensuring that it would never rise again. The fall of Carthage marked the end of an era, but Hannibal's legacy as one of history's greatest military minds remains unshaken. Hannibal's legacy endured far beyond his death in the destruction of Carthage. His tactical innovations and his ability to navigate the complex web of diplomacy influenced Roman military development for centuries. The comprehensive strategy he employed, blending diplomacy, psychological warfare, and military tactics, set a template for future commanders. Even in defeat, Hannibal forced Rome to evolve, becoming more resilient, more adaptive, and ultimately more dominant. Perhaps his greatest monument lies not in stone, but in the intangible realm of human achievement. Hannibal's campaign demonstrated how vision, courage, and intellectual brilliance can enable one individual to challenge an empire. Though ultimately unsuccessful, his 16-year campaign against overwhelming odds remains a testament to the extraordinary possibilities of human will and imagination in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. While swords and spears dominated the physical realm of conflict, an equally consequential struggle unfolded across the diplomatic landscape of the Mediterranean. Throughout the protracted contest between Carthage and Rome, alliances shifted like sand beneath desert winds. Smaller powers constantly recalculated their interests against the backdrop of the titanic confrontation between these two giants. Before descending the Alps, Hannibal had secured his rear by systematically cultivating tribal loyalties across Iberia. Unlike earlier Punic leaders who ruled through intimidation, Hannibal understood the value of cultural respect and personal connection. His fluency in local languages, his marriage to an Iberian princess, and his participation in indigenous religious ceremonies transformed subjugated peoples into willing confederates. Hannibal's diplomatic acumen extended to Gaul, where his advance emissaries had already established connections long before the main force reached the Roman crossings. The Boii and Insubres tribes of northern Italy had recently suffered harsh Roman pacification. Their lands had been confiscated for veteran colonies, and their warriors slaughtered for displaying independence. These grievances provided fertile ground for anti-Roman sentiment, which Hannibal skillfully cultivated. After his triumph, Hannibal's strategic chessboard expanded dramatically. Capua, Italy's second-largest city, switched allegiances to the Punic cause, providing urban infrastructure that the predominantly mobile Carthaginian forces had previously lacked. Syracuse, long a nominally independent ally of Rome, embraced Hannibal's forces, throwing off Roman influence under King Hieronymus, grandson of the legendary hero Thun. Most significantly, Philip V of Macedon saw an opportunity in Rome's moment of profound vulnerability. The ambitious Macedonian king negotiated a formal treaty with Carthage, creating a potential two-front war that stretched Rome's resources and military capacity. Had this Macedonian alliance been fully activated, the entire conflict might have taken a very different turn. Yet Rome's diplomatic response revealed its institutional strength and adaptability. Despite their military defeats, the Senate maintained its existing alliances through a combination of steadfast diplomacy and calculated intimidation. When wavering Italian communities considered defection, prompt military demonstrations and the public execution of pro-Punic factions reinforced the consequences of disloyalty. More subtly, Rome exploited ethnic and class divisions within communities under Hannibal's influence. They cultivated aristocratic elements who resented the populist reforms Hannibal had implemented. In Syracuse, they maintained communication with factions opposed to King Hieronymus's increasingly tyrannical rule. These internal connections proved invaluable when opportunities for counter-revolution arose. Rome also extended its diplomatic efforts to peripheral powers with strategic significance. Numidia, home to the light cavalry that formed the elite of Hannibal's mounted forces, was divided by rival kingdoms with conflicting interests. Rome identified Massinissa, a dispossessed Numidian prince, as a potential asset. By cultivating this relationship, Rome eventually secured Numidian cavalry support at Zama, turning the tide of the war in their favor. Roman diplomats also neutralized the Macedonian threat by allying with the Anatolian League, applying enough pressure on Philip V to prevent his full involvement in the Western conflict. Simultaneously, Rome maintained ties with Ptolemaic Egypt, ensuring that the region's rich grain supplies remained out of Carthaginian reach. Perhaps the most revealing example of Rome's diplomatic impact came from the events in Tarentum, where Hannibal's influence met fierce opposition. Through a combination of military prowess, strategic alliances, and diplomatic maneuvering, Rome managed to hold its ground, ensuring the long-term survival of the Republic. While Hannibal's campaign reshaped the Mediterranean world, it was Rome's diplomatic strength and adaptability that ultimately determined the fate of Carthage and its mighty general. One of the most significant cities in southern Italy, Tarentum, found itself caught in the diplomatic crossfire between Rome and Carthage. Frustrated by Roman garrisons that restricted their autonomy, prominent citizens secretly communicated with Hannibal's camp, offering to open the city gates during the 12th year of the war. This conspiracy succeeded in admitting Hannibal's forces, but the Roman garrison commander, having received intelligence of the plot, managed to withdraw his forces to the citadel overlooking the harbor, maintaining control of maritime access and effectively neutralizing the strategic value of Tarentum. This event highlighted a fundamental difference between the two powers. Hannibal's approach to alliance building was centered on his personal charisma and leadership, using his own guarantees and relationships to sustain coalition integrity. In contrast, Rome's system was institutional, with the Senate maintaining a consistent policy despite changing magistrates and fluctuating fortunes. This distinction between the two powers proved consequential as the war dragged on for years. When Hannibal focused his attention on one theater, alliances in other regions often deteriorated without his personal presence. Meanwhile, Rome's diplomatic relationships, embedded in institutional continuity, showed resilience against the vagaries of individual leadership. After Hannibal's defeat at Zama, Rome's peace terms reflected a deep understanding of diplomatic reality. Carthage was allowed to retain its core African territories, but was stripped of its external possessions. Rome established a buffer state dependent on Roman protection against Numidian expansion and prohibited Carthage from waging independent military actions. In essence, Rome transformed its greatest rival into a subordinate ally, imposing financial obligations that would last for 50 years, ensuring the generational alignment of interests. Even in defeat, Hannibal's influence did not fade. He briefly served as the chief magistrate of Carthage after the war, where he attempted to implement reforms aimed at reducing corruption and distributing tax burdens more equitably. His efforts to challenge the established oligarchic interests, however, generated powerful enemies who eventually collaborated with Roman factions seeking his elimination. Forced into exile, Hannibal sought refuge at various foreign courts. Roman envoys relentlessly followed his movements, pressuring each successive host, Antiochus of Syria, Armenia, and Bithynia, to surrender him. This relentless pursuit by Rome, conducted while the Roman military expanded eastward into Hellenic territories, demonstrated the Republic's long institutional memory and its commitment to eliminating potential threats, no matter how much time had passed. Hannibal's exile and eventual death are a testament to Rome's determination to secure its hegemony. The diplomatic dimension of the Punic Wars transcended individual personalities and reshaped Mediterranean geopolitics. What began as a competition between commercial powers eventually devolved into Roman hegemony. Former rivals were transformed into clients, allies into subjects, and neutral parties into interdependent systems. The Mediterranean, once populated by multiple independent actors, gradually simplified into a unipolar system, with Rome at its center. This transformation, as significant as any battlefield outcome, established patterns of international relations that would characterize the Mediterranean world until the Roman Empire's distant fall. The legacy of this diplomatic revolution continues to influence modern concepts of international order, alliance systems, and great power competition. Behind the battles and diplomatic maneuvering, the economic realities of the Punic Wars were just as consequential. The conflict wasn't just about armies clashing, it was a battle between distinct economic systems, each with its inherent strengths and fatal vulnerabilities. Carthage's economy relied heavily on maritime commerce, agricultural estates, and the silver mine in Spain, pillars that supported the city's vast trading empire. By the mid-3rd century BC, Carthage's commercial network stretched from the Black Sea to Britain, with specialized ships carrying textiles, ceramics, precious metals, and agricultural products cross established sea routes. Unlike Rome, where political office was the primary route to social advancement, Carthaginian elites derived their status from mercantile success. The governing council was made up of leading merchant families whose primary allegiance often lay with commercial interests rather than state policy. This structure led to decision-making patterns that prioritized immediate profit over long-term strategic planning. During the Second Punic War, the economic foundations of Carthage and Rome proved as important as the battles fought on the field. Carthage's economy was built on three main pillars: maritime commerce, large agricultural estates, and the wealth extracted from Spain's silver mines. The Carthaginian elites, primarily merchant families, gained their status not from political office, but from the success of their commercial ventures. These wealthy merchant families controlled the governing council, and their business interests often took precedence over state policy. Carthage's agricultural system was notably advanced. Roman writers like Cato the Elder praised the sophisticated farming techniques employed by Carthaginian landowners, such as crop rotation and complex irrigation systems. These methods produced significant agricultural surpluses, which not only funded the urban population of Carthage, but also supported trade, providing resources that could be exported across the Mediterranean. The silver mines, particularly those in the area of New Carthage, were another major source of wealth. At their peak, these mines produced an astonishing 300 pounds of silver a day, contributing to Carthage's financial might. This wealth funded Hannibal's military campaigns and sustained diplomatic efforts, keeping Carthage afloat during wartime. However, Carthage's economic model had its vulnerabilities. When Rome's military campaign disrupted maritime commerce and cut off Carthage's trade routes, the Republic faced severe financial difficulties. The loss of the Spanish silver mines in the Iberian campaign further crippled Carthage's ability to sustain Hannibal's forces in Italy. Even with his battlefield victories, Hannibal's position became untenable without these vital resources. In contrast, Rome's economy was rooted in agriculture, with a particular focus on small to medium landholdings worked by citizen farmers. These farmers, who were also the military backbone of the Roman Republic, provided the human capital necessary to defend the state. This structural integration of military and economic functions gave Rome remarkable resilience, even in the face of Hannibal's devastating raids. While Carthaginian commerce brought vast wealth, Rome's self-sufficiency allowed the Republic to endure prolonged conflict without the same financial strain. Despite the severe disruptions caused by Hannibal's campaigns, Rome's economic system demonstrated extraordinary creativity and adaptability. Faced with a decline in agricultural output and the threat of food shortages due to the destruction of farmland, Rome turned to a series of emergency measures. The Senate initiated voluntary loans from wealthy citizens, tapping into patriotic sentiment and offering preferential repayment terms. Rome also resorted to debasing its currency, reducing the silver content in coins to expand the money supply. Furthermore, they leveraged private entities to finance state operations and impose progressive tax structures, placing heavier burdens on the wealthiest citizens. The most remarkable of these efforts came after the Battle of Cannae, when Rome's treasury was nearly depleted. The Senate urged its citizens to donate personal gold and silver for military purposes. This collective sacrifice, a demonstration of social cohesion, allowed Rome to continue resisting Hannibal's forces despite the dire situation. It was a clear sign that Roman resolve transcended mere economic rationality. The economic strains of the war were felt by both powers, but Rome's ability to adapt and innovate gave it a critical advantage. In the aftermath of the war, Rome was able to recover and thrive. Despite the massive destruction of Italian agriculture, the redistribution of land to veteran soldiers helped revitalize the economy. Rome's capture of Carthaginian territories, particularly Spain and Sicily, provided new resources, including trade routes and tax revenues. The influx of war indemnities from Carthage further stimulated Roman economic growth. On the other hand, Carthage's post-war reconstruction efforts were severely constrained. The loss of external territories eliminated critical resources, and trade routes shifted toward Roman-controlled ports like Ostia and Syracuse. The decline of Carthage as a commercial powerhouse and the imposition of heavy financial burdens marked the end of its economic dominance. The Second Punic War, therefore, was not just a conflict between armies, it was a battle of economic systems. Carthage's reliance on maritime trade and slave labor proved unsustainable in the face of Roman resilience and self-sufficiency. This economic battle, alongside the military one, ultimately shaped the course of Mediterranean history, paving the way for Rome's rise to dominance. After returning from exile in the late 990s BC, Hannibal used his strategic brilliance to tackle the financial challenges facing Carthage. His reforms targeted the corruption that had plagued the state, prosecuting officials who had embezzled public funds, restructuring the tax system, and conducting audits to eliminate fraudulent claims on foreign debts. Hannibal also introduced state monopolies in key industries, which helped generate public revenue. His reforms were remarkably effective, allowing Carthage to make early repayments on war indemnities. However, this recovery raised alarms in Rome. The Senate, despite Carthage's restricted capacity to wage war, feared the resurgence of Punic economic power. The prompt repayment of war debts made possible by Hannibal's reforms heightened Roman concerns, leading to a firmer stance on Carthage's future. The Senate insisted on maintaining the original payment schedule, despite Carthage's available funds, as they feared the commercial competition that might arise from a revitalized Carthage. This fear of economic rivalry was one of the driving forces behind the Third Punic War. While the war was presented as a matter of security, it was clear that Roman commercial interests, particularly those of the equestrian class who had increasingly invested in trade, saw Carthage's recovery as a threat. Cato the Elder's famous declaration that Carthage must be destroyed resonated with both agricultural and commercial factions in Rome, albeit for different reasons. The final destruction of Carthage in 146 BC obliterated an economic system that had flourished for over 7 centuries. Skilled craftsmen perished or were enslaved, and Carthage's intricate trade networks disintegrated. Agricultural innovations, which had helped Carthage thrive, survived only through Roman adaptation. Documented in the agricultural treatise by Mago, the only Punic literary work that the Romans deemed worth preserving and translating. The long-term economic consequences of Carthage's destruction stretch far beyond the immediate gains for Rome. The removal of Carthage as a commercial power left a vacuum in the Mediterranean, Smaller trading states lost negotiating power, and Roman commercial interests began to establish monopolies across the region. The sophisticated banking and credit systems that had been based in Carthage were dismantled, creating financial disruptions that persisted for generations. The economic narrative of the Punic Wars reveals a deep divergence between Carthage and Rome. Carthage's economy was based on commercial success, reliant on maritime trade networks and mining operations, while Rome's economic model was based on agricultural self-sufficiency and military strength. This divergence shaped strategic decisions and ultimately influenced the outcome of the war. Rome triumphed not because it had greater wealth. Carthage initially commanded far superior financial resources, but because it demonstrated greater resilience under sustained pressure. The integration of economic, political, and military structures within Rome provided the institutional strength that Carthage lacked. This integrated approach laid the foundations for the patterns of economic organization that would define Western civilization for centuries. Beyond the military victories, the prolonged struggle between Rome and Carthage led to profound cultural exchanges and transformations. While Roman culture had initially been insular, absorbing influences from the Etruscans and Greeks, it began to open up to new ideas and practices, including those from Carthaginian society. Punic culture, rooted in Phoenician mercantile traditions, brought sophisticated religious systems, arts, and cosmopolitan sensibilities to the Mediterranean. The clash between these two powerful societies not only reshaped the political and economic landscape, but also influenced cultural and artistic developments, leaving a legacy that would extend far beyond the immediate military outcomes. The Punic and Hellenistic influences began to mingle long before the final end of the Punic Wars, particularly as Roman forces occupied former Carthaginian territories. These encounters introduced Romans to new architectural styles, advanced agricultural techniques, and administrative systems that offered practical advantages over traditional Italian methods. The pragmatic Roman mindset easily adopted useful innovations, while discarding elements that were seen as decadent or in conflict with Roman values. The invasion of Italy, however, catalyzed deep cultural anxieties within Roman society. As Hannibal's armies advanced into central Italy, traditional certainties began to falter. The defeats on the battlefield, such as the disastrous loss at Cannae, were interpreted by Roman religious authorities as signs of divine displeasure. This led to extraordinary ritual responses, including human sacrifices, an extreme measure previously rejected by Roman law but recorded by Livy after the Cannae defeat. Such actions reflected the deep psychological disorientation within Roman society, which lacked explanatory models to cope with repeated failures against an unstoppable enemy. This crisis prompted literary responses that sought to restore a sense of Roman identity. Figures like Quintus Ennius, the first great Roman epic poet, redefined Rome's historical narrative to emphasize the idea of manifest destiny and inevitable triumph. Despite setbacks, this cultural project of creating coherence from chaos helped establish historical interpretations that would shape Roman self-perception for centuries to come. The prolonged presence of Punic forces in southern Italy introduced direct cultural contact with Carthaginian society, bypassing previous Hellenistic filters. Citizen soldiers returning to central Italy not only brought battlefield experiences, but also exposure to alternative social structures, religious practices, and technological applications. Archaeological evidence shows a rapid adoption of Carthaginian agricultural tools, construction methods, and maritime technologies during and after the conflict. Hannibal's diverse multi-ethnic coalition, composed of soldiers from various regions, also led to cultural adaptations. His ability to maintain cohesion within this diverse force, despite ethnic and linguistic differences, demonstrates a high degree of cultural intelligence and flexibility. Evidence suggests that Hannibal's army actively incorporated Roman military innovations, particularly in fortification and siege techniques, showcasing a pragmatic approach that transcended cultural chauvinism. The resolution of the Second Punic War marked the most significant phase of cultural interaction. As Roman power expanded into former Carthaginian territories, there was a need to engage with established social structures. Roman governance models, originally designed for Italian communities with shared cultural backgrounds, proved inadequate for managing such diverse populations across the Western Mediterranean. This led to new cultural syntheses, particularly in regions like Sicily. Roman governors in Sicily integrated elements of Carthaginian provincial administration while also imposing distinctly Roman legal frameworks. Similarly, in Spain, where Punic influence had already transformed indigenous communities, Roman authorities retained many effective local governance systems while gradually introducing Latin cultural elements through veteran colonies and trade. Literary and artistic developments from this period reflected these complex interactions. Quintus Fabius Pictor, Rome's first native historian, composed his account of the Punic Wars in Greek rather than Latin, acknowledging that engagement with the wider Mediterranean world required cultural adaptation. This period also saw the first translations of Greek literary works into Latin, indicating that Roman culture needed to evolve to meet the demands of an expanding empire. Hannibal, during his brief political career after the war, implemented reforms that reflected Roman models while preserving Punic institutions. His deep familiarity with Roman society, gained through 16 years of warfare on Italian soil, shaped his governance approach, blending effective Roman elements with traditional Punic structures. Perhaps the most significant cultural transformation following the war occurred in religion. Traditional Roman religious practice focused on transactional relationships with deities protecting the state, but after prolonged exposure to Hellenistic and Punic religious systems, new religious practices began to take root. The adoption of Eastern cults, notably the worship of Magna Mater Cybele, was sanctioned during the final phases of the war. This openness to foreign religious practices did not mean the abandonment of Roman traditions, but rather the incorporation of useful elements while maintaining core Roman values. However, the Senate explicitly rejected aspects of Punic religion, such as child sacrifice, demonstrating a selective rather than wholesale adoption of foreign practices. This blend of cultural openness, adaptation, and selective integration would become a hallmark of Roman society, allowing it to expand and thrive as the Mediterranean's dominant power. The final destruction of Carthage in the mid-2nd century BC paradoxically ensured the preservation of certain Punic cultural elements through their incorporation into emerging Roman imperial culture. Agricultural techniques documented in Mago's treatise on farming were granted authoritative status through senatorial endorsement in the work's translation into Latin. Roman construction practices across newly acquired territories were also informed by architectural and engineering principles developed in North Africa. Furthermore, Carthaginian maritime trade networks provided valuable templates for Rome's own commercial expansion. The cultural legacies of this long-standing encounter between Carthage and Rome extended far beyond the immediate participants. As Rome expanded into the Hellenistic Eastern territories, it adapted administrative approaches developed for managing former Carthaginian possessions. This practical multiculturalism, necessitated by imperial expansion, had already been rehearsed through Rome's engagement with Punic cultural traditions. It laid the groundwork for a selective incorporation of foreign practices, as opposed to the wholesale imposition of Roman models, which became a hallmark of Roman governance in the centuries that followed. The Punic Wars, and especially the conflict between Hannibal and Rome, achieved mythic significance in Roman cultural memory. The obsessive repetition of Carthage must be destroyed by Cato the Elder underscored how deeply the Punic threat had penetrated Roman consciousness. Literary figures like Virgil, Livy, and Silius Italicus transformed these historical events into cultural touchstones that reinforced the Roman self-conception as a people destined for universal dominion, not merely through military power, but through their superior virtue. Hannibal himself underwent a cultural transformation within this narrative framework. In Roman thought, he became both the quintessential adversary and a figure of tragic nobility. Cicero, in his philosophical dialogues, presented Hannibal as embodying virtues that Romans admired: strategic brilliance, personal austerity, and unwavering commitment. At the same time, Hannibal remained the other, the ultimate foe against whom Roman identity could be defined. This cultural construction of Hannibal transcended historical reality to fulfill psychological needs within Roman society. The Romans were not merely fighting a military campaign, they were defining themselves as a people destined for greatness, and Hannibal's presence as the formidable adversary played a pivotal role in that process. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact of this cultural encounter was the emergence of models for imperial governance that balanced pragmatic flexibility with the preservation of core Roman values. The Roman engagement with Carthaginian civilization demonstrated that imperial rule could be effective even in a culturally diverse environment, as long as the empire was able to selectively incorporate useful practices while maintaining its identity. This precedent would inform subsequent imperial projects, from the Byzantine adaptation of Roman models to early modern European colonial endeavors. The Punic conflict's cultural dimensions extended far beyond the immediate outcomes of the wars themselves and would continue to shape patterns of cross-cultural interaction in Western history. What began as a collision between two distinct Mediterranean societies ultimately produced synthetic cultural forms that transmitted elements from both traditions through the centuries. In this way, Carthage achieved a form of immortality, despite its physical obliteration. Its cultural DNA was absorbed into the very empire that had destroyed it. 2 millennia after the last stones of Carthage were scattered and its fields salted, the reverberations of the Punic Wars continue to shape our understanding of history, strategy, and human potential. The multifaceted legacy of this ancient conflict transcends its immediate military outcomes to influence military thought, political development, and cultural imagination across centuries. In the military realm, the tactical innovations demonstrated throughout the conflict established paradigms that would define Western approaches to warfare for generations. The Battle of Cannae, that masterpiece of battlefield geometry, remains a required study at military academies worldwide. Its double envelopment maneuver reappeared throughout military history, from Frederick the Great's oblique assault at Leuthen to Moltke's encirclement at Sedan and Schwarzkopf's left hook during Desert Storm. Beyond specific tactical arrangements, Hannibal's campaign in Italy established conceptual foundations for maneuver warfare, strategic deception, and psychological operations. By consistently operating against Roman expectations, crossing supposedly impassable terrain, appearing where logistically impossible, and maintaining cohesion among disparate forces, Hannibal created an intellectual framework for asymmetric warfare that would influence military thinkers from Sun Tzu to T.E. Lawrence. The Roman response to these innovations also proved influential for subsequent military development. Fabius Maximus's strategy of delay and attrition, initially derided yet ultimately vindicated, established the concept of trading space for time when facing superior battlefield opponents. This approach would reappear throughout military history, from Kutuzov's defense against Napoleon to Soviet resistance against Nazi invasion. The very term Fabian strategy has since become synonymous with a method of cautious, long-term resistance in the face of a stronger enemy. The Punic Wars, through their military innovations and strategic breakthroughs, laid the foundations for centuries of military thought and practice. The Punic Wars, particularly the final destruction of Carthage, left a lasting legacy that continues to resonate through history. Though Rome suffered crushing tactical defeats during the conflict, its ultimate victory highlighted a crucial distinction between winning battles and winning wars. The lesson that strategic patience and systemic resilience can overcome tactical brilliance remains central to modern military thought. Contemporary military educators often cite the Punic Wars when emphasizing that victory requires the alignment of tactical, operational, and strategic levels of warfare, particularly in political realms. The impact of the Punic conflict was equally profound in Roman politics. The existential challenge posed by Hannibal's invasion catalyzed institutional developments within the Roman Republic that both strengthened and, ironically, eventually undermined its constitutional structure. Emergency powers granted to dictators like Fabius Maximus established precedents for executive authority that would later be exploited by figures such as Sulla and Caesar, transforming the Republic into an autocracy. More subtly, the expansion of Roman power following the Punic Wars fundamentally altered relationships between citizens, allies, and subjects. The incorporation of former Carthaginian territories necessitated new governance strategies. Roman methods of managing diverse populations evolved as a result of the challenges posed by ruling over such varied territories, leading to the creation of the provincial system that would later define the empire. The Punic Wars also served as a critical case study for political theorists. Niccolò Machiavelli devoted significant attention to the Punic Wars in his discourses on Livy, contrasting the stability of Rome's republican institutions with the mercantile pragmatism of Carthaginian governance. His analysis would influence Renaissance political thought and republican theory for generations, laying the groundwork for later debates on the nature of republics and empires. Economically, the destruction of Carthage removed a powerful commercial rival, allowing Rome to establish economic dominance across the Mediterranean. The elimination of Carthage as a commercial counterweight meant that Roman trade monopolies expanded, diminishing competition while enhancing the wealth extraction from provincial territories. Rome's newfound control over Mediterranean trade marked a significant shift in the region's economic landscape, setting the stage for centuries of Roman economic hegemony. Despite this, the technological and agricultural innovations preserved from Carthaginian civilization played a critical role in Roman success. Irrigation techniques, crop rotation systems, and specialized cultivation methods, documented in Mago's treatise, were implemented across Roman territories. These advancements improved agricultural yields from North Africa to Gaul. Furthermore, Carthaginian maritime technologies, particularly in shipbuilding, laid the foundation for expanded Mediterranean commerce under the Pax Romana. Culturally, the story of Hannibal became one of the most enduring narratives in Roman history. His resilience against overwhelming odds, maintaining resistance for 16 years on enemy soil without regular supply lines, established the archetype of the brilliant underdog. This narrative, which celebrated Hannibal's genius and tragedy, has resonated across centuries in various cultural traditions, from ancient Rome to Renaissance reinterpretations and modern cinematic treatments. Hannibal's role as the worthy opponent magnified Rome's eventual triumph, providing a justification for the extreme measures Rome took in response, including the human sacrifices after Cannae and the complete destruction of Carthage decades after the immediate danger had passed. For Romans, Hannibal's brilliance and nobility, combined with his status as the ultimate enemy, created a psychological framework for understanding their own identity and the value of their victory. The narrative of Hannibal's defeat served as a model for understanding encounters with civilized adversaries, contrasting them with barbarian opponents. Livy's historical accounts set the foundation for later interpretations of Hannibal, presenting him as both a figure of admiration and alien qualities. His military brilliance, personal discipline, and the foreign religious practices of Carthage made him both respected and rejected in Roman culture. This complex portrayal of Hannibal persisted through centuries of European thought. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical sources sparked renewed interest in the Punic Wars, with figures like Petrarch and Machiavelli drawing valuable lessons from the conflict. The art and literature of the period often depicted Hannibal alongside other great military leaders like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, recognizing his genius, while subtly marking him as an outsider in comparison to Roman and Greek heroes. In the Enlightenment, historians approached the Punic Wars with emerging frameworks of rational analysis, reflecting on the strategic, economic, and cultural impacts of the conflict. Hannibal's story, as both a military genius and a tragic figure, continued to influence Western thinking, from military strategy to political theory and cultural narratives that still shape our understanding of power and resistance. The final legacy of the Punic Wars extends far beyond the immediate military victories, profoundly influencing history, culture, and military strategy. Montesquieu, for example, examined how environmental and institutional factors shape the competing powers, offering a framework for understanding the strength and weaknesses of both Rome and Carthage. His analysis of the contrasting commercial and agricultural economic bases of these two powers established an interpretive approach that influenced subsequent historical methodologies. The Romantic period saw a particular fascination with the iconic Alpine crossing by Hannibal, a moment that epitomized human determination overcoming natural obstacles. J.M.W. Turner's painting, Snowstorm, Hannibal and His Army Crossing the Alps, 1812, captured this interpretation, presenting the event as a sublime confrontation between human will and elemental forces. This artistic treatment paralleled contemporary achievements, such as Napoleon's own Alpine crossing, showing how historical narratives often inform contemporary actions and ideals. In modern times, the Punic Wars continue to resonate in both cinematic and literary treatments, with each generation finding aspects of the conflict that connect to their contemporary concerns. The enduring fascination with asymmetric warfare, the resistance against imperial power, and the genius of an individual confronting institutional strength ensure that the conflict remains relevant, even in today's political landscape. Perhaps most significantly, the Punic conflict's legacy also lives in historical methodology itself. Edward Gibbon, whose Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire laid the foundation for modern historical analysis, pointed to the seeds of Rome's eventual collapse within the very victories that established its dominance. His study of Rome's victory over Carthage revealed that the destruction of its external threats weakened the internal cohesion of the empire, a key interpretive framework for understanding the rise and fall of empires. Archaeological investigations continue to shed new light on the ancient confrontation. Recent discoveries along the Alpine crossing route have confirmed details from classical accounts while providing fresh insights into the logistical challenges and engineering feats of Hannibal's campaign. Underwater archaeology in Mediterranean harbors has unearthed Punic and Roman vessel designs, revealing the naval aspects of the conflict that are often overshadowed by the famous land battles. For contemporary strategic thinkers, the Punic Wars offer continued relevance, especially in demonstrating how asymmetric capabilities create strategic dilemmas that transcend technological contexts. The struggle between institutional power and adaptive genius, between territorial defenders and mobile attackers, between hierarchical structures and networked adversaries. These dynamics continue to reappear throughout history, regardless of changing technological environments. The final legacy of the Punic Wars might lie in philosophical reflections on human potential itself. Hannibal's campaign represented a remarkable achievement at the outer boundaries of logistics, organization, and leadership. His ability to maintain coalition coherence among ethnically diverse forces, sustain operations without secure supply lines, and adapt tactics to varying circumstances while keeping a strategic focus provides a reminder of the extraordinary capabilities humans can achieve when confronted with overwhelming challenges. Simultaneously, the Roman response to Hannibal demonstrated equally remarkable human qualities: institutional resilience, collective sacrifice, strategic patience, and adaptive learning. The competition between these different manifestations of human excellence, individual genius versus collective strength, innovative disruption versus institutional adaptation, offers insights into the diverse expressions of human potential that transcend the specific historical context. Even today, 2,200 years after the Battle of Zama, the confrontation between Rome and Carthage continues to inform our understanding of military affairs, political development, economic systems, cultural interaction, and human potential. What began as a conflict between Mediterranean powers evolved into a key reference point for understanding Western civilization itself, a testament to how deeply this ancient struggle has shaped the world we live in today. Beyond tactical brilliance and strategic vision, beyond the commanders who crossed the Alps and humbled Rome, stood a human being whose personal qualities and inner life remained tantalizingly elusive yet central to understanding his extraordinary achievements. Hannibal emerges from ancient sources as a complex individual whose character transcended the simplistic portrayals of either Roman demonization or modern heroic mythology. Born into the prominent Barca family around 247 BC, Hannibal inherited both extraordinary privilege and immense burdens. His father, Hamilcar, preserved Carthaginian independence during the mercenary revolt through sheer military genius, casting a long shadow over his son's development. Contemporary accounts often noted the physical resemblance between father and son, the same piercing gaze, the same austere bearing, the same ability to inspire loyalty among diverse followers. Hannibal Barca, one of the greatest military strategists in history, was not only defined by his battlefield brilliance, but also by his remarkable personal qualities and leadership style. While many military leaders rely on privilege or inherited status, Hannibal developed qualities that went beyond martial skill, showing a profound intellectual cultivation and adaptability that distinguished him from his contemporaries. Ancient sources emphasize Hannibal's intellectual prowess, particularly his fluency in Greek philosophical traditions and his mastery of multiple languages, including Greek, Latin, and several Iberian dialects. This linguistic versatility allowed him to communicate directly with the diverse forces in his coalition, ensuring that there were no distortions in the translation, which often plagued ancient commanders. Hannibal's personal habits were also marked by a disciplined austerity, reflecting the values of simplicity rather than indulgence often associated with Carthaginian elites. Polybius, though generally hostile to Carthaginian interests, acknowledges Hannibal's extraordinary self-discipline. Unlike Alexander the Great, who was known for his legendary feasts and drinking bouts, Hannibal was known for his moderation in food, wine, and sexual activity. This temperance served a practical military purpose, enabling him to maintain clear judgment and physical stamina during extended campaigns. His marital alliances, notably his primary union with an Iberian aristocratic woman, not only cemented crucial tribal alliances, but also showcased his respect for local customs. Despite his adherence to Carthaginian aristocratic practices, such as maintaining multiple households, Hannibal's ability to balance cultural accommodation with the preservation of Punic identity was central to his leadership style and his ability to unite diverse groups. Hannibal's relationships with his subordinates were characterized by a blend of authority and accessibility. Unlike Roman commanders who maintained rigid status distinctions, Hannibal regularly consulted his officers, regardless of social background. He valued practical expertise over hereditary rank, which allowed him to identify and promote exceptional leaders like Hannibal, whose cavalry leadership proved decisive in many battles. This meritocratic approach was crucial to maintaining cohesion and strength within his diverse army. In addition to his intellectual brilliance, Hannibal's extraordinary physical courage allowed him to personally conduct reconnaissance of the battlefield, rather than relying solely on scouts. His willingness to place himself on the front lines earned him deep respect from his troops and provided him with first-hand knowledge that informed his battle strategies. Hannibal's calm under pressure was particularly evident after losing his right eye during the crossing of the Arno marshlands. Even in this condition, he remained steady and determined, helping to maintain his army's morale. Hannibal's strategic thinking was marked by his flexibility. During the Italian campaign, he shifted tactics depending on the situation, avoiding direct confrontation with the aggressive consuls when necessary and embracing Fabian delay tactics when facing opponents using attrition strategies. This adaptability was coupled with a consistent strategic vision that allowed him to balance immediate battlefield conditions with long-term goals. Beyond his military prowess, Hannibal also demonstrated political acumen during his brief return to Carthage. After his defeat, he implemented administrative reforms to challenge the entrenched corruption within Carthage, and his opposition to oligarchic self-enrichment showed his commitment to civic welfare over personal advancement. However, this principled stance ultimately made him vulnerable politically, as it alienated powerful factions within Carthaginian society. Hannibal's profound loyalty to his brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, who served with him in his military campaigns, also shaped his leadership style. Despite the risks, he incorporated them into key military roles, strengthening his command structure and ensuring familial solidarity within the military ranks. Overall, Hannibal's legacy lies not only in his military genius, but also in his ability to lead through example, his intellectual and personal discipline, and his cultural adaptability. His leadership style, rooted in meritocracy, emotional control, and adaptability, serves as a model for leaders in any era, demonstrating the extraordinary potential of an individual to shape the course of history. Hannibal Barca, celebrated for his military brilliance, was equally remarkable for his personal qualities and psychological resilience. Not merely a tactical genius, Hannibal embodied a profound intellectual cultivation and emotional discipline that set him apart from his contemporaries. His journey reveals the complexities of human potential and leadership in the face of overwhelming concerns. Unlike many great historical figures who falter under the weight of familial expectations, Hannibal absorbed his father Hamilcar's qualities while developing his unique capabilities. Ancient sources highlight Hannibal's intellectual development, particularly his fluency in Greek philosophy and mastery of multiple languages, including Greek, Latin, and various Iberian dialects. This linguistic versatility enabled him to directly communicate with the diverse forces in his coalition, eliminating the distortions of translation that often hindered other commanders. Hannibal's personal discipline was striking. Polybius, despite his hostility towards Carthage, provides a rare, detailed account of Hannibal's simplicity and self-control. Unlike Alexander the Great, who was known for legendary feasts and indulgences, Hannibal practiced moderation in food, wine, and even his personal life. This discipline served a vital military function, enabling him to maintain clarity of thought and physical stamina throughout his campaigns. He shared the hardships of common soldiers, often sleeping on the ground and eating simple rations, fostering loyalty and connection within his troops. His leadership style was marked by unusual accessibility. Hannibal's ability to connect with his subordinates was one of his most admired traits. Unlike Roman commanders who upheld rigid social hierarchies, Hannibal valued practical expertise over inherited rank. He regularly consulted with officers from all backgrounds, promoting exceptional talents, such as Hannibal, who played a crucial role in his cavalry's success. This meritocratic approach helped maintain cohesion within his diverse and multi-ethnic army. Moreover, Hannibal's bravery went beyond the battlefield. He regularly conducted personal reconnaissance of the terrain, gaining first-hand knowledge that informed his strategic decisions. This courage, coupled with his willingness to share the dangers of the front line with his soldiers, earned him deep respect and trust. Perhaps most remarkable was his psychological resilience. After suffering the loss of his right eye during the harsh crossing of the Arno marshlands, Hannibal maintained his composure and determination. Even in the face of defeat, he chose to remain engaged in diplomacy and military advisory roles rather than retreat into despair. His final act, choosing poison over capture by Roman pursuers, was consistent with his lifelong commitment to maintaining control over his fate rather than succumbing to humiliation. Throughout his career, Hannibal's capacity for adaptability shone through. He demonstrated flexibility in tactics, shifting from direct confrontations to evasion when faced with Roman delay tactics. His ability to adapt, while maintaining a consistent strategic vision, allowed him to navigate the complex and ever-changing dynamics of war. Hannibal's commitment to reforming Carthage after his military defeat further exemplifies his leadership. Upon returning to Carthage, he initiated financial and administrative reforms to combat corruption, signaling his dedication to the welfare of the state over personal gain. Yet his unyielding opposition to oligarchic corruption ultimately led to his political vulnerability. His profound loyalty to his brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, also shaped his leadership style. He incorporated them into key military roles, reinforcing the sense of familial solidarity that Hamilcar had instilled in him. This familial bond, while sometimes limiting objective assessment of their abilities, ensured trusted lieutenants in critical military decisions. Hannibal's ability to balance his cultural identity with political strategy was another hallmark of his leadership. While he demonstrated respect for local customs, particularly through his marriage alliances, he never lost sight of his Punic heritage. This balance between cultural accommodation and the maintenance of core identity defined much of his approach to coalition management and political strategy. Ultimately, Hannibal's life represents more than just a series of military campaigns. It embodies a deep exploration of human potential. His story illustrates how exceptional capabilities are not innate but developed through education, experience, and self-discipline. Hannibal's extraordinary achievements remind us that history's most profound impacts often stem from individuals who, through their sustained commitment to personal growth and strategic purpose, challenge the boundaries of what is possible. Even today, 2 millennia after his death, Hannibal's legacy serves as a powerful reminder of human resilience and adaptability. His story is not one of a mythical hero, but of a fully human figure whose personal qualities and leadership continue to inspire those who seek to overcome the greatest of odds. At the onset of the First Punic War, Rome was at a significant disadvantage in naval warfare. Unlike Carthage, which had generations of maritime expertise, Rome had little experience with naval combat. Historically, Rome's conflicts had been resolved through land-based operations, with maritime activities mainly limited to coastal patrol and merchant protection. The Roman Republic possessed few warships and lacked the specialized personnel required for fleet management and naval tactics. This initial disparity makes Rome's rapid adaptation in naval warfare all the more remarkable. According to Polybius, one of the most reliable sources on the conflict, the Romans managed to salvage a beached Carthaginian ship and used it as a template to build their own fleet. Within months, they had constructed over 100 warships, despite having no prior experience. This rapid mobilization of resources showcased Rome's incredible institutional capacity for adaptation, a characteristic that would define their response throughout the entire conflict. Recognizing their lack of naval experience, Roman engineers developed a crucial innovation, the corvus, raven, a boarding bridge with a metal spike. The corvus allowed Roman vessels to grapple enemy ships, turning naval engagements into infantry battles where Rome's legions had the advantage. This innovation neutralized Carthage's superior expertise in ramming tactics, shifting the focus of naval warfare to Roman military strengths. The effectiveness of this innovation was clearly demonstrated in the Battle of Mylae, where Gaius Julius, commanding the newly constructed Roman fleet, defeated experienced Carthaginian forces using the corvus. The victory was a significant milestone for Rome, marking their first naval triumph in history. The Senate celebrated this success with the first naval triumph in Roman history, setting a precedent for celebrating maritime victories alongside traditional land campaigns. However, the naval conflict was not without its setbacks. The Roman victory at the Battle of Ecnomus, one of the largest naval engagements in history, involving nearly 330 ships and over 150,000 men, was a massive success. Yet the following year, a devastating storm destroyed more than 280 Roman vessels returning from Africa, causing approximately 100,000 casualties. This environmental catastrophe was even worse than any single battlefield defeat. The unpredictable Mediterranean weather had a significant impact on naval strategy, with winter storms and seasonal conditions limiting naval operations. Supply convoys had to be carefully timed, and commanders like Fabius Maximus had to schedule landings with the weather in mind. Those who ignored these natural limitations, such as Publius Claudius Pulcher, often faced devastating consequences. The resolution of the First Punic War was heavily influenced by naval power rather than land campaigns. The decisive battle at the Aegates Islands saw the Roman fleet, under the command of Gaius Lutatius Catulus, intercepting a Carthaginian supply convoy attempting to reinforce besieged positions in Sicily. The resulting victory severed Carthage's logistics and made their remaining territorial possessions unsustainable, forcing Carthage to accept peace terms, which included substantial reductions in their fleet and territorial concessions. In the years between the First and Second Punic Wars, the naval development of both powers diverged. Carthage, restricted by the peace treaty, shifted its maritime resources toward commercial expansion, maintaining just enough naval presence to protect its trade routes. Meanwhile, Rome consolidated its naval capabilities by developing infrastructure, establishing fleet bases at Ostia, and constructing facilities for fleet replenishment. This development would be crucial in the Second Punic War. Recognizing Rome's naval superiority, Hannibal intentionally avoided maritime confrontation when advancing on Italy. His famous Alpine crossing wasn't just a tactical innovation, it was a strategic necessity. The Mediterranean had become a Roman lake, and Hannibal was forced to find land-based routes to penetrate Italian territory. Throughout his 16-year campaign in Italy, Hannibal's disadvantage in naval power constrained his strategic options. Reinforcements and supplies had to follow circuitous and vulnerable routes, with irregular communication with Carthage. Meanwhile, Rome's ability to operate simultaneously in Spain, Sicily, and Italy, without significant logistical constraints, stemmed directly from their maritime dominance, which allowed for the transfer of resources between operational zones. The naval dimension also played a crucial role in the situation in Syracuse. King Hero II had been a reliable ally of Rome throughout the First Punic War, providing critical logistical support and intelligence. After his death, his grandson, Hieronymus, shifted allegiance to Carthage, providing them with potential naval facilities and demonstrating the ongoing significance of naval power in determining the outcome of the conflict. In the First Punic War, naval power played a decisive role in the eventual Roman victory. Initially, Rome was at a significant disadvantage in maritime warfare. With minimal naval tradition and limited resources, the Romans quickly realized the strategic importance of the sea and adapted their tactics accordingly. Their ability to rapidly build a fleet and innovate with naval technology, particularly the development of the corvus, a boarding bridge with a metal spike, allowed Roman vessels to engage Carthaginian ships in ways that neutralized their expertise in ramming tactics. The corvus transformed naval battles into infantry engagements, where Rome's strength lay. This innovation was put to the test in the Battle of Mylae, where Gaius Julius, commanding Rome's newly constructed fleet, defeated Carthage's experienced forces. The victory marked a turning point as Rome celebrated its first naval triumph, a milestone in its transition from a continental power to a maritime empire. However, the war at sea was not without its challenges. In the following year, a devastating storm destroyed over 280 Roman ships, causing immense casualties. The loss was a tragic reminder that nature itself could be as dangerous as the enemy. Mediterranean weather patterns, particularly winter storms, significantly influenced naval strategy, forcing commanders to carefully time their supply convoys and landing operations. Despite these setbacks, Rome's naval dominance was cemented in the Battle of the Aegates Islands, where the Roman fleet under Gaius Lutatius Catulus intercepted a Carthaginian supply convoy attempting to reinforce besieged positions in Sicily. The Roman victory at Aegates Islands effectively severed Carthage's logistics, making their territorial holdings unsustainable and forcing them to accept peace terms that included a reduction of their fleet in territorial concessions. The interwar period between the First and Second Punic Wars saw different strategies unfold on the seas. Carthage, constrained by the peace treaty, shifted its maritime resources toward commercial expansion, while Rome solidified its naval capabilities, developing infrastructure at strategic locations like Ostia and Misenum to support its growing fleet. During the Second Punic War, Hannibal deliberately avoided direct maritime confrontations with the Roman fleet, recognizing that the Mediterranean had become a Roman lake. His famous Alpine crossing was not just a tactical innovation, but a strategic necessity, as it was the only way to reach Italy without risking confrontation on the seas. Throughout his 16-year campaign, Hannibal's forces were hampered by logistical challenges, relying on circuitous and vulnerable supply routes. In contrast, Rome's ability to operate in multiple theaters, Spain, Sicily, and Italy, was supported by its dominance at sea, allowing the free flow of resources between these operational zones. The naval aspect of the conflict also played a significant role in the dynamics of Syracuse. Initially, King Hero II of Syracuse had been a loyal Roman ally, providing vital support during the First Punic War. However, after his death, his grandson Hieronymus switched allegiances to Carthage, providing them with potential naval facilities. Despite this, Rome's naval superiority ensured that Syracuse's harbor could not be fully utilized by the Carthaginians, marking yet another example of how naval control influenced broader strategic outcomes. The final phase of naval dominance came during the Third Punic War. Despite the restrictions placed on Carthage's navy after their defeat, the defenders of Carthage attempted to secretly construct a new fleet. They even engineered a new harbor outlet to bypass the Roman blockade. However, this effort was ultimately insufficient, as Roman naval superiority proved overwhelming once again, marking the definitive end of Carthaginian resistance. Rome's journey from a land-based power to a maritime empire is a testament to their capacity for adaptation and innovation. The integration of naval and land operations during the Punic Wars created organizational precedents for subsequent imperial expansion. This period also saw technological advances in shipbuilding, harbor engineering, and navigation that facilitated the expansion of Roman maritime commerce, which would define the Pax Romana. The contrast between Carthage and Rome's naval strategies highlights the institutional differences between the two powers. Carthage's naval advantage was based on specialized knowledge concentrated within certain families, making it vulnerable to disruption. In contrast, Rome's systematic approach to naval development, standardizing ship construction, formalizing training, and establishing permanent infrastructure, created a lasting institutional capability that transcended individual expertise. Ultimately, the Punic Wars demonstrated how Rome's ability to absorb catastrophic losses, sustain multiple theaters of operation, and maintain strategic coherence despite leadership changes was due to its robust institutional framework. This organizational strength, rather than individual brilliance, was what enabled Rome to prevail against the genius of Hannibal and Carthage's tactical innovations. War elephants, one of the most iconic elements of the Carthaginian military, played a significant role in the Punic Wars. These massive creatures were used not only for their sheer physical power, but also for their psychological impact on the battlefield. They were designed to disrupt enemy formations, charging through infantry lines with immense weight and momentum, creating breaches that cavalry or light infantry could exploit. Elephants also served as elevated platforms for missile troops, and their commanding presence provided both tactical advantages and intimidation, striking fear into both enemy soldiers and their horses, unaccustomed to such creatures. However, the journey that these elephants undertook, particularly during Hannibal's famous Alpine crossing, posed unprecedented challenges. Historians suggest that the Carthaginian army began their journey from New Carthage with 37 elephants. The logistical effort required to transport such creatures was immense, as they needed specialized forage, which was hard to come by in the alpine environment. Historical accounts describe wooden platforms being constructed to provide stable footing for the elephants across treacherous terrain. Despite these efforts, only a few elephants survived the journey, with estimates suggesting as few as 7 made it to Italy. This high attrition rate raises questions about the strategic value of these animals. Was their psychological impact more important than their practical battlefield use? In the early battles on Italian soil, the surviving elephants made a significant psychological impact. At the Trebia River, they contributed to routing Roman cavalry, who were unprepared for the terror of these massive creatures. Roman horses, particularly, were instinctively terrified of the elephants, which disrupted cavalry formations and hampered Roman coordination. Over time, however, the Roman army adapted. Their familiarity with elephants lessened the initial terror, and the Romans developed countermeasures to mitigate their psychological effect. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals that war elephants were equipped with sophisticated armor, including protective headgear and body coverings made from fabric or leather. Specialized saddles were designed to carry multiple warriors, and mahouts, the elephant handlers, used specific tools to guide the elephants through chaotic battlefield conditions. Despite what many artistic depictions suggest, these elephants rarely carried massive towers during combat, as the weight and instability of such structures would have compromised their mobility. Instead, smaller platforms for a few warriors were used, prioritizing maneuverability over grandeur. The Roman response to elephants evolved rapidly through experience. At first, the sight of these giant creatures caused significant losses among the Roman legions. But as the war progressed, Roman commanders developed specialized tactics to counter the elephants. One method involved creating corridors through which charging elephants could be funneled, avoiding disruption to Roman battle lines. The Romans also deployed specialized anti-elephant troops armed with axes to attack the elephants' legs, spears to target vulnerable areas like their eyes and trunks, and incendiary devices to exploit the elephant's fear of fire. Another effective tactic was the use of portable obstacles designed to channel the elephants into predetermined zones where they could be isolated and neutralized. Romans also employed acoustic tactics, using loud instruments like trumpets to confuse the elephants and disrupt their handlers' control signals. The psychological impact of elephants extended far beyond the battlefield. The presence of these creatures influenced Roman recruitment and training, as soldiers were specifically prepared for the possibility of encountering them. In Italian communities where the threat of elephant attacks loomed, anticipatory terror played a significant role in diplomatic calculations and alliance decisions. Symbolically, war elephants represented Carthage's exotic power and imperial reach. For Carthaginian forces, these creatures were not just weapons of war, but also symbols of strength and cultural identity, connecting them to ancient traditions of warfare in the Near East and North Africa. For the Romans, however, elephants came to symbolize the foreignness of their adversary, reinforcing the conceptual divide between the familiar Italian opponents and the alien Punic threat. This symbolic dimension of elephant warfare found expression in Roman art and coinage. Captured elephants were prominently featured in Roman triumphs, becoming shorthand for Carthaginian forces and a powerful reminder of the enemy they had overcome. Even in defeat, elephants became part of the broader Roman narrative of conquest and superiority. Although war elephants played a crucial role in the early Punic Wars, their practical use began to fade as Roman tactics evolved. While elephants initially disrupted enemy formations with their sheer size and power, their psychological impact remained significant long after their battlefield utility waned. Even after Carthage's defeat and the dissolution of its elephant corps due to treaty restrictions, the symbolic presence of these majestic creatures continued to resonate in Roman propaganda, reinforcing the connection between Carthage and these iconic beasts. The elephants of Carthage, primarily North African forest elephants, were smaller than the Indian elephants often depicted in popular culture. Standing at around 8 to 9 feet at the shoulder, these creatures were formidable in their own right, though they were considerably smaller than their modern counterparts. The extinction of this subspecies in the 2nd century AD is believed to have been directly linked to the pressure exerted by Roman demand for exotic animal displays, leading to overhunting in North Africa. Military historians continue to debate the cost-benefit analysis of war elephants in ancient warfare. While they were high-maintenance assets, requiring specialized care, food, and personnel, their impact on morale was undeniable. The resource requirements, along with the operational limitations of using living, breathing weapons of war, make the inclusion of elephants in battle a complex strategic choice. Their battlefield value was as much psychological as it was tactical, influencing Roman recruitment, training, and battle strategies. The psychological effect of these creatures extended far beyond the battlefield. Roman horses in particular were not accustomed to the sight and smell of elephants, which led to significant disarray among Roman cavalry during initial encounters. Over time, however, Roman forces adapted, developing specialized countermeasures to neutralize the elephant's impact. These included anti-elephant units armed with axes to target the elephant's legs, spears to attack their eyes and trunks, and even incendiary devices to exploit the elephant's fear of fire. Despite these adjustments, elephants remained a powerful symbol of Carthaginian strength and imperial reach. They represented the alien nature of Carthage to the Romans, reinforcing the distinction between Roman civilization and the foreign threat. In Roman art and commemorative coinage, elephants were often depicted as shorthand for Carthaginian forces, and capturing them in battle became a celebrated achievement. This symbolism continued to influence Roman cultural narratives long after the practical use of elephants had ended. During the Third Punic War, elephants played only a minimal role, but their symbolic significance remained. The Romans had fully embraced the narrative that Carthage and elephants were inextricably linked, and this connection was used to justify aggressive actions against the Carthaginian state. The legacy of these elephants extends beyond military tactics to broader cultural understanding. The presence of these creatures in ancient Mediterranean warfare influenced not only military thinking, but also cultural representations, from Hannibal's famous Alpine crossing to the symbolic use of elephants in later Roman art and literature. In the broader historical context, Hannibal's campaigns in Italy set the stage for Rome's response to their greatest military adversary. The story of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, exemplifies Rome's resilience and ability to adapt in the face of formidable opposition. Scipio's early military career, marked by personal tragedy and a series of unexpected command opportunities, would eventually lead him to the decisive confrontation that ended Hannibal's campaign in Italy. Scipio's rise to power was a testament to both his personal brilliance and Rome's institutional flexibility. Despite being young and relatively inexperienced, Scipio was entrusted with command in Spain after the death of his father and uncle, both of whom had fallen fighting in Spain. His ability to cultivate relationships with local tribes and respect for Iberian customs demonstrated strategic insight that paralleled the approaches of his adversary, Hannibal. His capture of New Carthage, a strategic Carthaginian stronghold, highlighted his tactical ingenuity and set the stage for Rome's eventual triumph. Publius Cornelius Scipio, later honored with the title Scipio Africanus, emerged as one of Rome's most exceptional military commanders. His career, marked by remarkable tactical brilliance, political struggles, and diplomatic finesse, made him the key figure in Rome's ultimate victory over Carthage. In the Iberian campaign, Scipio demonstrated extraordinary leadership. Upon arriving in Spain, he quickly adapted to the local customs and earned the trust of indigenous tribes by showing respect for their traditions. His ability to build alliances proved invaluable and complemented his military operations. One of his most significant successes in Spain was the capture of New Carthage, a key Carthaginian stronghold. Scipio employed brilliant tactical deception to catch the Carthaginians off guard. Learning that the city's lower walls were vulnerable due to shallow waters along the lagoon, Scipio dispatched a specialized force through these temporary passages, achieving complete surprise and capturing the city in a single day. His treatment of captives following this victory demonstrated his political acumen and personal magnetism. Spanish hostages were released without ransom, generating goodwill among local communities. And female captives were treated with respect and returned to their families, reinforcing his reputation for honor and self-discipline. As Scipio's reputation grew, his political career also began to take shape. Despite his extraordinary military success, he faced opposition back in Rome. Conservative senators, including Fabius Maximus, resisted Scipio's proposal to directly attack North Africa, arguing that Rome should focus on securing its hold in Italy before engaging in risky overseas operations. Despite the resistance, Scipio's appointment to lead the African campaign was a reflection of Rome's dire situation and a recognition of his exceptional capabilities. Scipio's methodical approach to the African campaign reflected his strategic patience, which contrasted with the hastier tactics of other Roman commanders. Instead of engaging directly with Carthage's main army, he focused on securing his base near Utica and forged a crucial alliance with the Numidian prince Massinissa, whose cavalry would prove vital in future battles. The Battle of Zama, where Scipio faced Hannibal in direct combat, was a masterpiece of Roman adaptation and individual genius. Having studied Hannibal's tactics both through personal experience and an analysis of previous battles, Scipio developed a formation specifically designed to counter the Carthaginian approach. His troops were arranged with wide spacing between units, creating passages through which Hannibal's charging elephants could pass without disrupting the overall battle formation. Once the elephants were neutralized, Scipio's infantry engaged the Carthaginian center, while his superior cavalry, particularly Massinissa's Numidians, executed a decisive envelopment maneuver, a tactic Hannibal had used to defeat the Romans years earlier. Following the victory at Zama, Scipio imposed peace terms that reflected both his strategic vision and pragmatism. Instead of calling for the complete destruction of Carthage, as advocated by hardliners like Cato the Elder, Scipio focused on maintaining Carthage as a functional buffer state against Numidian expansion. His terms included a reduction in Carthage's military capacity and a financial indemnity, ensuring that Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean would be unchallenged while avoiding unnecessary devastation. However, despite his unparalleled success, Scipio's career was not without political challenges. The aristocratic factions in Rome, concerned about his growing personal prominence, manufactured corruption charges against him and his brother Lucius. After the war in the East, Scipio withdrew from public life, retreating to his estates, disillusioned by the political machinations that had undermined his career. The parallels between Scipio and his greatest adversary, Hannibal, were striking. Both men were exceptional linguists, with Scipio reportedly fluent in several Iberian dialects, similar to Hannibal's diplomatic skill in speaking multiple languages. Both men maintained personal austerity and physical discipline, fostering strong connections with their soldiers, and both exhibited remarkable tactical flexibility, adapting their strategies to changing circumstances while staying focused on their long-term goals. Scipio's career exemplified the virtues of Roman leadership: strategic patience, tactical flexibility, and the ability to adapt to circumstances. But it also highlighted the limitations of individual greatness within the Roman Republic's political system, as his ultimate retreat from public life showed how political factions could stifle even the most successful military careers. The lives of Hannibal Barca and Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, present two distinct paths of leadership shaped by their contrasting political and cultural contexts. Hannibal, operating within the family framework established by his father, drew his authority from the legacy of the Barca family rather than state institutions. On the other hand, Scipio, despite his individual brilliance, functioned within the constitutional structures of Rome, where his allegiance to the Roman Republic and its traditions ultimately shaped his approach to leadership. Hannibal's story is one of singular genius operating within a more familial and personal system of loyalty. His personal oath to defeat Rome, made in his youth, guided his every action throughout his military career. In contrast, Scipio's path reflects the Roman Republic's ability to integrate exceptional individuals within its institutional framework, even when those individuals threaten to overshadow traditional authority. Despite facing opposition and political setbacks, Scipio remained loyal to Rome's constitutional system, accepting political defeat without resorting to military intervention in civic affairs. The differences between these two leaders became starkly evident in their ultimate fates. Hannibal, despite his unparalleled success on the battlefield, was hunted into exile after Carthage's defeat. Moving between increasingly marginal courts, he spent his final years as a fugitive, while Roman power continued to expand. On the other hand, Scipio's military achievements laid the foundation for his family's prominence within Roman society, and his position in Rome remained secure despite political opposition. Scipio's legacy extends beyond his specific military victories. His ability to incorporate allied forces, particularly the Numidian cavalry, established a model for utilizing provincial auxiliaries, a concept that would become central to Rome's imperial armies. Scipio's ability to balance traditional Roman military strengths with tactical innovations learned from his adversaries created a synthesis that allowed Rome to adapt to changing circumstances without sacrificing its core values. In contrast, Hannibal represented the epitome of individual brilliance, constrained by the limitations of his system. He operated within the confines of Carthaginian family traditions, but lacked the institutional support that could have helped sustain his long-term success. Scipio, however, exemplified how a republican system could harness individual talent without compromising its political integrity. His career demonstrated that Roman institutions could identify and promote exceptional leaders without undermining the stability of the state. The parallel careers of Hannibal and Scipio not only shaped the fate of the Mediterranean, but also highlighted the contrasting strengths of their respective civilizations. While Hannibal's genius was undeniable, it was the Roman system, with its institutional resilience and ability to adapt, that ultimately prevailed. In this respect, Scipio Africanus was not just Rome's answer to a brilliant adversary, but the embodiment of a republican synthesis that combined individual capability with collective strength, ensuring Rome's survival and dominance for centuries to come. Cato the Elder, a staunch conservative, famously declared that Carthage must be destroyed, a sentiment that became the rallying cry for the Third Punic War. Having witnessed Carthage's remarkable recovery after the Second Punic War, Cato's insistence on the city's destruction was fueled by the economic revival he observed. Despite the punitive peace terms imposed on Carthage, the city's commercial and agricultural sectors had regained vitality, making it an economic rival once again. This resurgence, coupled with ongoing border disputes with Rome's ally Numidia, provided the pretext for the final conflict. For Cato, the comparison between Carthage's economic recovery and Rome's own administrative challenges underscored the threat Carthage posed. The Roman Republic, struggling with corruption and inefficiency in its provincial management, saw Carthage's more effective governance as a direct challenge to its own system. The Third Punic War was thus not just about military conquest, but also about eliminating a rising commercial power that threatened Rome's hegemony. The final defeat of Carthage marked the end of an era and the completion of Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean. However, the legacy of Carthage, particularly its strategic genius embodied by Hannibal and its resilient economy, lived on. This conflict, with its intricate mix of military, political, and economic factors, set the stage for the Roman Empire's expansion and the development of Western civilization as we know it today. By the early 150s BC, Carthage's patience with Rome's systematic dismantling of its power finally wore thin. The relentless incursions by Numidia, Rome's ally, and the annexation of valuable agricultural lands by Numidia created a situation that Carthage could no longer ignore. The Carthaginians, faced with the violation of their territory, assembled military forces in defense, a clear breach of the treaty terms imposed by Rome. This violation gave Rome the legal pretext it needed to intervene. The Senate dispatched a delegation demanding extraordinary concessions from Carthage. These included surrendering 300 children from elite families as hostages and transferring all military equipment to Roman control. Desperate to avoid another catastrophic war, Carthage complied with these humiliating demands, delivering both hostages and vast quantities of weapons. However, what followed revealed Rome's true intentions. Having secured both Carthaginian hostages and disarmament, Rome issued the final devastating demand. The entire population of Carthage must abandon their city and relocate at least 10 miles inland. The city's connection to the sea, which had sustained Carthage for 7 centuries, was to be severed. This was effectively cultural suicide, and it became clear that no level of compliance would ever satisfy Rome's determination to eliminate its ancient rival. Faced with extinction, the Carthaginians chose resistance. What followed was a remarkable civilian mobilization, as the disarmed city was transformed into an improvised arsenal. Women donated their hair to make ropes for catapults. Metal ornaments were repurposed as weapons, and temple decorations were melted down for military use. Agricultural tools became military equipment, and abandoned mines were converted into production facilities for armaments. Within months, the supposedly disarmed population had created a formidable defense. The siege that followed proved unexpectedly challenging for Roman forces. The city's formidable defenses, including triple walls reaching 40 feet high, integrated towers, and complex defensive zones, had been continuously reinforced since the previous conflict. The Carthaginian artificial harbor, with its sophisticated docking arrangements and defensive installations, complicated the Roman naval blockade. Most importantly, the defenders' desperate commitment created resistance that surprised the Romans, who were used to quick victories when facing an overwhelmed enemy. Initial Roman operations suffered from inadequate preparation and overconfidence. Consul Magnus Marcellus attempted a premature assault without the proper siege equipment, resulting in significant casualties against determined Carthaginian defenders. The Roman naval efforts also faced difficulties as Carthaginian countermeasures, such as fire ships and improvised vessels, disrupted the blockade. The course of the campaign shifted with the appointment of Publius Cornelius Scipio, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, as commander of the Roman forces. Recognizing the difficulty of the siege, Scipio adopted a systematic approach focused on complete isolation of the city rather than direct assault. His forces constructed massive circumnavigation works to block the landward approach to the city, while reinforcing the naval blockade with continuous patrol operations. The aim was to starve the defenders into submission rather than engage in costly direct attacks. In response, the Carthaginian defenders displayed extraordinary innovation. Engineers constructed a new harbor outlet through solid rock, concealing the operation from Roman observers until it was completed. This engineering marvel briefly disrupted the Roman blockade, allowing newly constructed vessels to escape. However, the disruption proved short-lived, as the overwhelming Roman naval superiority quickly shut down this new exit route. The final Roman assault began in the spring, with a focus on the Colon Harbor district, where the Carthaginian defenses had weakened due to months of starvation. Roman forces established a foothold in this sector and engaged in brutal urban combat, moving towards the heart of the city, the Bursa citadel. The fighting became intense as Roman and Carthaginian forces clashed house to house through the narrow streets of Carthage. The defenders, though facing deteriorating conditions, fought with ferocious determination, contesting every building. Despite the defenders' heroic efforts, the tide of the war had shifted. The Roman forces, with superior resources and determination, would soon break through and bring an end to the centuries-long power of Carthage, marking the final chapter in the Punic Wars. The final moments of Carthage's resistance were marked by unimaginable suffering. As the remaining population concentrated within the citadel, Roman forces finally breached the city's ultimate defenses. What followed was nothing short of horrific. The city's commander, Hasdrubal, surrendered in a last attempt to save his family. However, his wife publicly denounced him before immolating herself and their children. This act of defiance, witnessed by Scipio himself, became a fitting end to a civilization that had chosen extinction over Roman subjugation. The Romans, having secured Carthaginian hostages and disarmed the population, sought to eliminate the remnants of their rival. Scipio, determined to make an example of Carthage, ordered the city's complete destruction rather than a conventional occupation. The surviving structures were systematically demolished, and the building materials were scattered to prevent any reuse. The agricultural land was ritually salted, rendering it barren and symbolically ensuring that Carthage would never rise again. The surviving population of Carthage was enslaved and scattered across Roman territories, further eradicating any potential for the city to regroup or rebuild. This destruction was not only military, but cultural, as Rome sought to obliterate not just a rival power, but an alternative civilizational model that had shown remarkable resilience despite previous defeats. The systematic removal of Carthaginian achievements, including the destruction of their libraries, with the exception of Margot's agricultural treatises, was a deliberate effort to erase the memory of a civilization that had once challenged Roman dominance. Archaeological evidence has confirmed the thoroughness of this destruction. Excavations show a destruction layer containing evidence of intense fires hot enough to melt metal objects, and human remains showing signs consistent with a massacre rather than conventional battle casualties. The city's magnificent harbor installations, renowned throughout the Mediterranean, were methodically dismantled, rendering them permanently inoperable. The destruction of Carthage marked the beginning of a new era. The territory was transformed into the Africa province, the first trans-Mediterranean addition to Rome's expanding empire. Julius Caesar later proposed a colonial resettlement on the site, which was implemented after his assassination as Colonia Julia Carthago. This Roman city, built atop the ruins of Carthage, eventually became the provincial capital, though it bore no cultural continuity with the civilization it replaced. For the Romans, Carthage's destruction was both a triumph and a cautionary example. Polybius records Scipio's famous statement as he watched the city burn, reflecting the profound awareness that imperial powers might one day face a similar fate. The complete annihilation of Carthage, a Phoenician civilization located in Africa with a multicultural composition, symbolized the final victory of Rome's militarized agrarian system over the commercial, religious, and governmental models of Carthage. The eradication of Carthage was so thorough that subsequent regional history developed exclusively along Roman lines. But the legacy of Carthage lives on. The phrase Carthaginian peace, referring to settlement terms designed to permanently eliminate an opponent rather than merely defeat them, originates from this historical moment. The salting of fields, whether literal or symbolic, represents the ultimate extension of victory from military defeat to cultural erasure. Archaeological research continues to uncover evidence of Carthaginian culture beneath the Roman layers. Recent excavations have revealed previously unrecognized Punic elements, suggesting that despite Rome's efforts at eradication, aspects of Carthaginian civilization persisted through incorporation into later cultures. Even the most determined attempts at cultural annihilation rarely achieve complete success, as Carthage's legacy endures, albeit in hidden forms. The United States Naval War College, officers gather to analyze ancient battles whose lessons transcend technological evolution. At West Point and Sandhurst, cadets trace maneuvers executed on dusty plains over 2 millennia past. In corporate boardrooms, executives study strategic principles developed for conflicts fought with spear and sword. The Punic Wars, particularly the extraordinary campaigns of Hannibal Barca, continue providing intellectual frameworks for understanding conflict, leadership, and strategic thinking across diverse contexts in our contemporary world. This persistent relevance stems from the conflict's foundational nature in Western military and political development. The challenges faced by both Rome and its North African adversary, asymmetric capabilities, multicultural coalition management, resource allocation across multiple theaters, balancing tactical flexibility with strategic consistency, remains central to modern organizational leadership. Despite radical transformations in technology and social structures, the enduring fascination with these ancient struggles transcends historical interest to inform practical approaches across disciplines. Military professionals find particular value in studying the tactical innovations demonstrated throughout the conflict. The double envelopment at Cannae remains the quintessential battlefield maneuver, demonstrating perfect coordination between center and wings while exploiting momentary positional advantage. The Lake Trasimene ambush illustrates principles of terrain utilization and deception that remain applicable across technological contexts. The Roman adaptation following these defeats, developing counter-tactics while maintaining institutional cohesion, provides a central case study in organizational learning under extreme pressure. Beyond specific engagements, these campaigns demonstrate enduring principles of operational art that transcend technological evolution. Hannibal's approach to logistics, living off conquered territories while maintaining strategic mobility, established paradigms for force projection that influenced commanders from Napoleon to Patton. The Roman system emphasized secure supply lines, standardized equipment, and replacement protocols that would characterize modern military organization. These contrasting approaches continue informing contemporary debates regarding mobility versus security in expeditionary operations. Strategic studies programs worldwide particularly value examining how each power leveraged distinctive strengths while addressing critical vulnerabilities. The Punic emphasis on superior generalship, coalition warfare, and operational mobility reflected realistic assessments of demographic limitations and commercial priorities. The Roman focus on institutional resilience, standardized training, and strategic persistence similarly aligned with their agricultural foundation and citizenship structure. This alignment between strategic approach and underlying societal characteristics remains central to effective security planning. Across historical contexts, political scientists and international relations theorists find equally valuable lessons in the diplomatic dimensions of the protracted conflict. The management of alliance systems, neutralization of potential threats through preemptive diplomacy, and calibration of peace terms to achieve sustainable outcomes, rather than merely punitive satisfaction, all represent challenges that persist in contemporary geopolitics. The evolution from a bipolar Mediterranean system to Roman hegemony offers instructive parallels to modern transformations in international order. Leadership studies across disciplines, military, political, corporate, educational, draw inspiration from the contrasting leadership models exemplified by principal figures. Hannibal's approach emphasized individual brilliance, holistic understanding across domains, military, cultural, psychological, and adaptability within a consistent strategic vision. The Roman system developed distributed leadership capabilities through standardized training, clear organizational structures, and promotion based on demonstrated competence. These different leadership philosophies, individual genius versus institutional excellence, continue informing organizational design and leadership development across sectors. Technological innovation during the conflict similarly provides templates for understanding adaptation under competitive pressure. But the Roman development of the Corvus boarding bridge to neutralize Punic naval superiority represents a classic example of asymmetric response to technological disadvantage. The engineering solutions during the Alpine crossing demonstrate how determined leadership can overcome environmental constraints through technical creativity. These historical cases inform contemporary approaches to technological disruption and competitive innovation in fields ranging from military modernization to corporate competition. Business strategists have particularly embraced lessons from these ancient conflicts. The contrast between the Mediterranean trading network, flexible, opportunity-focused, innovation-friendly, and the Roman agricultural military complex, standardized, process-oriented, scale-advantaged, presents instructive parallels to contemporary competition between agile disruptors and established industry leaders. The ultimate Roman victory through institutional resilience. At the United States Naval War College, officers gathered to analyze ancient battles whose lessons transcend technological evolution. At West Point and Sandhurst, cadets traced maneuvers executed on dusty plains over 2 millennia past. In corporate boardrooms, executives study strategic principles developed for conflicts fought with spear and sword. The Punic Wars, particularly the extraordinary campaigns of Hannibal Barca, continue providing intellectual frameworks for understanding conflict, leadership, and strategic thinking across diverse contexts in our contemporary world. This persistent relevance stems from the conflict's foundational nature in Western military and political development. The challenges faced by both Rome and its North African adversary, asymmetric capabilities, multicultural coalition management, resource allocation across multiple theaters, balancing tactical flexibility with strategic consistency remains central to modern organizational leadership, despite radical transformations in technology and social structures. The enduring fascination with these ancient struggles transcends historical interest to inform practical approaches across disciplines, as military professionals find particular value in studying the tactical innovations demonstrated throughout the conflict. The double envelopment at Cannae remains the quintessential battlefield maneuver, demonstrating perfect coordination between center and wings while exploiting momentary positional advantage. The Lake Truss mean ambush illustrates principles of terrain utilization and deception that remain applicable across technological contexts. The Roman adaptation following these defeats, developing counter-tactics while maintaining institutional cohesion, provides a central case study in organizational learning under extreme pressure. Beyond specific engagements, these campaigns demonstrate enduring principles of operational art that transcend technological evolution. Hannibal's approach to logistics, living off conquered territories while maintaining strategic mobility, established paradigms for force projection that influenced commanders from Napoleon to Patton. The Roman system emphasized secure supply lines, standardized equipment, and replacement protocols that would characterize modern military organization. These contrasting approaches continue informing contemporary debates regarding mobility versus security in expeditionary operation. Strategic studies programs worldwide particularly value examining how each power leveraged distinctive strengths while addressing critical vulnerabilities. The Punic emphasis on superior generalship, coalition warfare, and operational mobility reflected realistic assessment of demographic limitations and commercial priorities. The Roman focus on institutional resilience, standardized training, and strategic persistence similarly aligned with their agricultural foundation and citizenship structure. This alignment between strategic approach and underlying societal characteristics remains central to effective security planning. Across historical contexts, political scientists and international relations theorists find equally valuable lessons in the diplomatic dimensions of the protracted conflict. The management of alliance systems, neutralization of potential threats through preemptive diplomacy, and calibration of peace terms to achieve sustainable outcomes rather than merely punitive satisfaction all represent challenges that persist in contemporary geopolitics. The evolution from bipolar Mediterranean system to Roman hegemony offers instructive parallels to modern transformations in international order. Leadership studies across disciplines, military, political, corporate, educational, draw inspiration from the contrasting leadership models exemplified by principal figures. Hannibal's approach emphasized individual brilliance, holistic understanding across domains, military, cultural, psychological, and adaptability within a consistent strategic vision. The Roman system developed distributed leadership capabilities through standardized training, clear organizational structures, and promotion based on demonstrated competence. These different leadership philosophies, individual genius versus institutional excellence, continue informing organizational design and leadership development across sectors. Technological innovation during the conflict similarly provides templates for understanding adaptation under competitive pressure. But the Roman development of the Corvus boarding bridge to neutralize Punic naval superiority represents a classic example of asymmetric response to technological disadvantage. The engineering solutions during the Alpine crossing demonstrate how determined leadership can overcome environmental constraints through technical creativity. These historical cases inform contemporary approaches to technological disruption and competitive innovation in fields ranging from military modernization to corporate competition. Business strategists have particularly embraced lessons from these ancient conflicts. The contrast between the Mediterranean trading network, flexible, opportunity-focused, innovation-friendly, and Roman agricultural military complex, standardized, process-oriented, scale-advantaged, presents instructive parallels to contemporary competition between agile disruptors and established industry leaders. The ultimate Roman victory through institutional resilience. Rather than brilliant leadership, the Punic Wars offer cautionary lessons regarding sustainable competitive advantage versus temporary brilliance, a distinction that remains central to business longevity. Popular culture continues processing these historical events through creative reinterpretation. Cinema has repeatedly attempted to capture the dramatic potential of the Alpine crossing, though technical and budgetary constraints have limited full realization of this spectacular achievement. Historical novels exploring the conflict, from Flaubert's Lambeau to Ross Leakey's Hannibal, continually reimagine these events for successive generations, often reflecting contemporary concerns regarding imperialism, cultural clash, and exceptional leadership. Archaeological investigations continue enriching our understanding through material evidence that complements literary accounts. Recent excavations along alpine routes have identified encampment sites confirming aspects of ancient descriptions while providing new insights into logistical challenges. Underwater archaeology near Sicilian waters has recovered rams from warships engaged in the First Punic War naval battles. The ongoing excavation of ancient Carthage itself, beneath the modern Tunisian capital, continues revealing cultural sophistication that challenges traditional narratives of civilizational hierarchy. Digital humanities approaches have enabled new analytical perspectives through computational examination of ancient sources. Network analysis techniques applied to diplomatic relationships documented in classical texts illuminate alliance patterns previously obscured by a narrative focus on primary powers. Geographic information systems integrated with archaeological data enable more precise reconstruction of campaign movements, revealing logistical constraints and opportunities that influence strategic decisions. These approaches demonstrate how technological innovation and research methodology continues to enhance understanding of even well-documented historical events. Educational applications extend beyond military academies to broader pedagogical contexts. The narrative arc of the conflict, featuring exceptional individuals, dramatic reversals, ethical dilemmas, and civilizational consequences, provides an exceptional teaching vehicle for developing critical thinking skills. The complex interaction between individual agency and structural factors challenges simplistic historical interpretation while demonstrating how contingent factors shape long-term outcomes. These qualities make the Punic Wars particularly valuable for educational approaches, emphasizing analytical skills rather than mere factual transmission. Ethical dimensions are receiving increasing scholarly attention as contemporary concerns influence historical interpretation. The Roman decision to completely destroy Carthage raises questions regarding proportionality and conflict termination and cultural erasure as a policy instrument. The willingness to sacrifice civilian populations during the final siege similarly provokes examination of leadership ethics under existential threat. These historical cases provide valuable perspective for contemporary ethical discourse regarding civilizational conflict, cultural preservation, and legitimate war termination. Perhaps most profoundly, these ancient conflicts continue to illuminate fundamental questions regarding human nature and social organization, often transcending specific historical circumstances. The tension between individual brilliance and institutional resilience, between innovative disruption and systemic persistence, between cultural diversity and centralized efficiency, these dialectical relationships, revealed through the Punic struggle, remain central to understanding human affairs across contexts. The 21st century faces challenges that would seem entirely alien to participants in these ancient conflicts: climate change, artificial intelligence, bioengineering, space exploration. Yet the fundamental questions regarding how societies organize themselves, how they respond to existential threats, how they balance innovation with stability, and how they develop leadership capable of addressing complex challenges remain remarkably consistent across millennia. In this respect, the echoes of those distant conflicts continue resonating not merely as historical curiosity, but as profound exploration of persistent human challenges. The dust of Cannae, the rocks of alpine passes, the ruins of the ancient North African metropolis may belong to antiquity, but the principles revealed through these struggles remain eternally relevant to understanding the human condition. As long as societies face existential challenges requiring exceptional leadership, strategic vision, and organizational adaptation, the Punic Wars will continue providing intellectual frameworks for understanding our contemporary world. As we look at these ancient conflicts, it's clear that the lessons from the past are not just relics for scholars, but tools to shape the future. If you're inspired by the timeless principles of strategy, leadership, and resilience, join us in the next video on Nocturne Historia, where we'll dive into how modern leaders are adapting these age-old strategies to the challenges of today. The echoes of history are more relevant than ever. Let's explore together.